Feather-like snow fell from the sky, slowly falling among the blood-red plum branches. In the deepest part of the snow field, there is a man kneeling. He bent down weakly, but raised his arms slightly strangely. Only when you get closer can you see that there are two gleaming silver threads falling from the mountain wall, piercing through the most vulnerable part of the man's wrist. Just a little movement is a piercing pain. Li Fuyu is known to everyone in the cultivation world. He used to touch the way of heaven with his hands, and everyone admired Jiyue Guangfeng. 5 years ago, for some reason, he suddenly went crazy and disturbed the peace of the world. Until a few days ago, the power of the three realms finally combined to suppress him here. As the wind and snow intensified, the man's originally clear consciousness gradually became blurred. In a daze, Li Fuyu saw a familiar white figure not far away. "Fuyu, come here, come to master." The man stood under the plum branch, smiled and stretched out his hand towards him. "Master! Master, I am here." Li Fuyu wanted to get up, but the next moment his body was pulled back by the silver chain. The wound opened again, and blood flowed from the wrist. Li Fuyu had never been in such a mess in his life, but he didn't care. Li Fuyu's mind was full of thoughts about Master saying that he would never abandon him, and sure enough, Master came to save him now. Li Fuyu's voice was trembling, her upper and lower teeth kept bumping, and she could only make an intermittent sound with all her strength. He didn't know how many times he called Master, but in the end his voice was completely hoarse and he couldn't speak a word. But Suiwen was still quiet. The person Li Fuyu was thinking of did not come. It was also at this time that the white shadows suddenly dispersed, and Li Fuyu finally saw clearly that there was nothing but foggy plums in full bloom. It turned out that what happened just now was just an illusion born by Li Fuyu. Master eventually broke the contract. He has ascended to the upper realm for many years, and he may not remember himself for a long time. The snowfield became quiet, and after an unknown amount of time, a faint bell rang suddenly from the distant mountains, and the silver chain on Li Fuyu's wrist also trembled slightly. The fusion formation is finally set up. Li Fuyu laughed when she heard the sound of the bell when she was clearly about to die. Everyone in the cultivation world really found a good eye for fusion formation Yao Zhengzhong, whose owner is Li Fuyu's master who has ascended for many years. On the clock is the spiritual consciousness left by the master before his ascension, and only with his consent, the group of monks can invite Yao Zhengzhong to serve as the eye of the formation. It turns out that it's not that the master doesn't remember me, he just wants me to be scattered like everyone else in the cultivation world. This formation took 7 days to open, and once it was activated, the people under the formation would only end up scattered. Even the master abandoned him. Li Fuyu had never realized so clearly like this moment that she had fallen into the situation of betraying all relatives. Li Fuyu, you are so ridiculous. As soon as he thought of this, the originally peaceful snowy field suddenly became violent with the wind, and the red mark on the man's forehead turned black along with the wildly dancing snowflakes. The devilish energy in Li Fuyu's body instantly surged. The silver chain buried in the wrist then vibrated, and Li Fuyu could even clearly feel that her spirit veins were being crushed bit by that thing. It hurts, it really hurts. After a loud bang, stones fell from the mountain wall. Li Fuyu stood up against the pain that could tear apart the soul, his hands were clenched into fists, and the next moment the two immortal chains that could shatter hearts and souls were actually broken. No one thought that Li Fuyu, who was insane, could destroy the divine weapon passed down from ancient times in an instant. The gust of wind howled, Li Fuyu's black hair fluttered in the wind, the aura and devil energy in his body overflowed together, crushing the surrounding plum blossoms into red mud. Li Fuyu blankly glanced at her palm, then looked forward in some confusion. He is free, but he has nowhere to go. In the deepest part of the snowfield, this is the place where Li Fuyu grew up, and it is also his subconscious home. The demonic energy in Li Fuyu's body surged crazily, and the scars and spiritual veins could no longer withstand such tossing. He couldn't help vomiting blood, and then fell to the ground. The man slowly lay flat on the ground, closed his eyes and let Bai Shui and Chi Mei bury his body. At this moment, a familiar voice suddenly came from Li Fui's ear, "Master, senior brother." The next moment, he was carefully hugged into his arms. Li Fui weakly opened his eyes. He saw that the person who hugged him through the wind and snow was actually his junior brother Lin Chaochen. "Are you injured?" Lin Chaochen saw the blood on Li Fui's body, his voice was trembling. Different from Lin Chaoken's gentleness, seeing the person in front of him, Li Fui subconsciously stood up with his sword. "Don't come over," he said sharply. The young man called out "senior brother" with great attachment, and then slowly lifted the sword with red eyes. Lin Chaochen was silent for a while, and then he gritted his teeth and said to Li Fui, "Brother, you beat me for the last time. If you beat me, I will let you go and never look for you again." "Let me go?" Li Fui did not expect that Lin Chaochen was willing to let her go. In just a split second, the past events that happened on this snow field passed through Li Fui's mind like a revolving lantern. His master is the son of a fairy, and he has never understood mundane things. After bringing Lin Chaochen back, the master who devoted himself to cultivating the Tao and didn't know how to take care of children could only hand him over to his big apprentice Li Fui. The boy in front of him was actually raised by Li Fui himself. Li Fui once took him by the hand and taught him to walk, protected him with spiritual power to learn how to control the sword, and even the first word Lin Chaochen knew in his life was "senior brother." After his master ascended, Lin Chaochen once told Li Fui that from now on, his senior brother is everything to him. "Okay." Li Fui said this word without any hesitation. He had long since ignored life and death, but Lin Chaoken's words reached out to him like a life-saving straw. It turns out that there are still people who are willing to believe in themselves and are willing to let themselves die. In the snow-covered Miazhu, two monks competed with swordsmanship in the snow. Li Fui's sword intent is invincible, but it's a pity that he was seriously injured, and his heart would vibrate with every move. Even so, after a few tricks, Lin Chaochen still fell into a disadvantage. Li Fui's sword had already lightly touched Lin Chaoken's chest. He was only short of one blow, and he would have completely defeated Lin Chaochen. Li Fui, whose body was at its peak, should have stabbed at the opponent at this time, but before he could do it, what Lin Chaochen said just now rang in Li Fui's ears. He knew the junior brother wanted to let him go. Li Fui knew exactly how powerful her sword was. If she really stabbed down, it would destroy half of the opponent's cultivation at worst. So at this moment, Li Fui restrained her sword intent subconsciously. The silver-white blade brushed past Lin Chaoken's chest, and slowly pierced into the void. But at the same moment, a icy sword light flew out of Lin Chaoken's hand, and pierced fiercely in the chest of the opposite person. Just such a sword shattered Li Fui's heart and soul. When Lin Chaochen came to his senses, Li Fui's body had been pierced by the sword and fell into his arms. Blood gushed out from Li Fui's chest, instantly dyed his clothes red, and even splashed onto Lin Chaoken's cheek. Li Fui never knew that there was so much blood in her body. This sword was really too fast. Li Fui stared blankly at her chest, and suddenly laughed in Lin Chaoken's arms. In the end, everyone betrayed their relatives and left no one behind. He had never been so tired before. Li Fui closed his eyes slowly, only the roar of gale was left in his ears. He didn't leave any words to Lin Chaochen, but exhausted his last bit of strength and patted the young man. The long sword protruded from Li Fui's chest. The man fell down and finally stopped struggling. Not far away, the fusion formation deployed by the great powers of the cultivation world began to operate, and a dazzling golden light hit Li Fui's broken chest. At the last moment, Li Fui finally figured out why Lin Chaochen appeared here. The immortal locking chain just now is also a link of the fusion formation, and the formation will not be officially opened until it shatters one's own heart veins. Now that the immortal chain is broken, the task of shattering his own heart must of course be handed over to others. Lin Chaochen said that he would let him go, but he was just acting from the beginning to the end. After all, he knew that he would soften his heart when facing his senior brother. In this round, the winner is destined to be Lin Chaochen. There was a golden light shining between the cliffs, and it was as bright as two suns appeared in the sky for a while. But the next moment, that beam of golden light gradually dimmed until it disappeared. Li Fuyu, a legend in the cultivation world, was lost in spirit. Li Fuyu spent half her life cooking oil over a fire, with flowers blooming in brocade. Who would have thought that she would end up like this in the end? Li Fuyu just died like this. The author is too kind. After the senior brother went mad, the protagonist gradually matured. Only when he personally killed the senior brother he relied on the most, Lin Chaochen officially embarked on this lonely road of king. I finally saw the growth of the protagonist in this chapter. So why did Li Fuyu go mad? The author seems like you haven't said it yet. If he is dead, it doesn't matter how he got mad, asking is just what the plot needs. Please tell the logic of the plot. I always feel that there is still a story that is not clear. Scattering flowers. Lin Chaochen has finally become the #1 person in the cultivation world. With a loud bang, the sawdust on the beam suddenly fell like rain, and the man lying on the bed woke up from his sleep. Almost every night Li Fuyu, oh, no, now he should be called Li Fenglan, would dream about the things she saw after her death in her previous life. A novel called Taoist in Heaven. The protagonist is his junior brother Lin Chaochen, and he is the villain in the novel. Li Fenglan didn't know why he saw these things, and when he became conscious again, he had already returned to this world. 5 years have now passed. Usually when he wakes up, he will feel a little bit of emotion. Fortunately, he is no longer a villain in this life, but a small cannon fodder with only a few thousand words, the most inconspicuous low-level disciple in the sect. But today he just wants to say, fuck, what's going on? Is this house about to collapse? After a pause for a few seconds, the mortal Li Fenglan quickly got up from the bed. He put on the veiled hat, put on the crane cloak, and quickly walked out of the room holding the lamp. The location of Meiguang Mountain where Li Fenglan lives is very remote, and after nightfall, she can't hear anything except the occasional chirping of birds. For the people in Tianmian Palace, living here is no different from being exiled. Li Fenglan thought maybe only he, a salted fish, would enjoy life here. Hiss, it's so cold. Li Fenglan poked out the lamp, and walked out of the room after making sure that there was nothing unusual outside. The room was a bit high. He looked up and began to think about how he could get to the roof. But before Li Fenglan could figure out a way, following the soft cracking of the tiles, the thing that fell on the roof rolled, and then hit the ground heavily before he could react. What is this? Li Fenglan was stunned for a moment. If he hadn't subconsciously stepped back half a step, the thing might hit him and send him back to the second dimension. After pausing for a while, Li Fenglan finally squatted down slowly to study what it was that fell from the sky. The moonlight was exposed from the gap between the distant mountains and spread gently on the ground. Through the moonlight, Li Fenglan finally saw clearly that the person lying here turned out to be a man. He was wearing a white robe with gold trim, which was half stained red with blood. The man closed his eyes, his slender eyebrows were tightly knit together, and his expression looked a little painful. Li Fenglan discovered that it turned out that what fell from the sky was not something, but his junior brother Lin Chaochen, who didn't talk about martial arts. With Lin Chaoken's current appearance, he clearly had a demon in his heart, and he was just about to follow in his own footsteps and become obsessed. It turns out that Lin Chaochen, the protagonist of Zhijao Xingja in Taoist in Sleep, also has demons? The second she saw Lin Chaochen, Li Fenglan subconsciously clenched the handle of the lamp in her hand, and the knuckles of her fingers turned white due to excessive force. He thought that if he stabbed the silver lamp handle down, would he be able to avenge his previous life? But such thoughts only existed for a moment. Li Fenglan's spiritual roots were completely destroyed, and she was not much different from ordinary people. He knew that with such a stab, he could only be knocked down by Lin Chaoken's protective barrier. So Li Fenglan gave the man on the ground a cold look, and then she was about to get up and go back to the house to close the door. Bad luck, really bad luck. Unexpectedly, at this moment, Lin Chaochen, who fell on the ground, suddenly grabbed his sleeve, and began to mutter. Let go. Li Fenglan tugged at his sleeves. Seeing that Lin Chaochen didn't intend to let go, Li Fenglan wanted to tear off his sleeves and leave, but when he thought of the meaning behind this action, he took his hand back. It was at this moment that Li Fenglan heard clearly what Lin Chaochen was muttering. Lin Chaochen, who was already the sword-wielding immortal of the sect, fell to the ground alone on this moonlit night, muttering softly like a child who was worried about being abandoned, "Senior brother, senior brother." Li Fenglan couldn't help but pause. Senior brother? Besides himself, which senior brother does Lin Chaochen have? The next moment, Li Fenglan, who was about to pull out her sleeves and leave, suddenly leaned down and whispered into Lin Chaoken's ear, "Your senior brother died a long time ago." But in an instant, Lin Chaochen, who fell on the ground, opened his eyes, and a red light flashed in his eyes. The next moment the man stood up suddenly, grabbed Li Fenglan's shoulder and said, "Take me to the house." In the southwest sky, several sword lights gradually became clear. Li Fenglan immediately understood that her good junior brother should have caused trouble after giving birth to a demon, and was avoiding the pursuit. Li Fenglan herself is very familiar with this script. Before Li Fenglan could move, Lin Chaochen, who was still lying on the ground dying, dragged him directly into the room. Lin Chaochen stood behind Li Fenglan, imprisoning him in his arms with only one arm, unable to move. Before Li Fenglan could stand still, a flute sound suddenly appeared in his ears. The sound is so small that it is easily overlooked. Ordinary disciples of Tianmian Palace would not understand what the music meant, but Li Fenglan's eyes widened the moment she heard it. The forbidden area of Tianmian Palace has been stolen. Jianguang, the flute sound representing theft, and Lin Chaochen behind him, who was clearly out of place. The answer was already on the table. After Lin Chaochen gave birth to a demon, he stole something from the forbidden area. Boy, what a thrill! Although Li Fenglan is only a salted fish, he also knows that his good junior has become the sword-wielding immortal of Tianmian Palace. Therefore, Li Fenglan really couldn't figure out what Lin Chaochen, who was so senior, would take such a risk for. The point is, there is absolutely no mention of this plot in the novel. In order to avoid those people, Lin Chaochen immediately used spiritual power to set up a blindfold after entering the room. The man who was temporarily troubled by the inner demon obviously didn't notice that the spirit root of the man in white in his arms was crippled and couldn't stand a little trouble. Lin Chaoken's spiritual power was too domineering. While he was setting up a blindfold, Li Fenglan in his arms suddenly coughed due to the fluctuation of spiritual power. The next moment, before Li Fenglan could figure out the question just now, he completely lost consciousness and fainted in the arms of the man. Unlucky, extremely unlucky. Li Fenglan saw that at the moment she fell down, a gleam of clarity suddenly flashed in the man's eyes. Li Fenglan was awakened by the faint scent of bamboo. The moment he opened his eyes and saw the sapphire carvings on the bed, he realized where this place was. Tianmian Palace, Yanyi Mountain. Beside him is a screen painted with Xiangfei bamboo, outside the window is lingering smoke, and there is a tall building made of black wood. Li Fenglan thought that she was going to die at the hands of Lin Chaochen last night, but she never expected that Lin Chaochen not only did not kill herself, but even brought herself back to his residence. It seems that the readers of Tianmian Dao Sheng complained well, Lin Chaoken's character is too generous and kind, even treating his enemies is as gentle as a spring breeze. Except for senior brother Li Fenglan added silently in her heart. Ordinary monks couldn't tell that Lin Chaochen had a heart demon, let alone what the flute sound last night represented. It's understandable that he didn't kill people, but why was he brought here? Lin Chaochen moved here after the baby was born, and Li Fenglan often came to Yanyi Mountain to visit his junior brother, and even stayed here a few times. After his rebirth, he never thought that one day he would return to this familiar place. But fortunately, this is just a side hall that Li Fenglan has never been to before, and it doesn't bring up too many unpleasant memories for him. It can be regarded as revisiting the old place, but there is no nostalgia in Li Fenglan's eyes. He roughly scanned the room, then put on the valance that had fallen by the pillow, and slowly stood up. Li Fenglan felt ashamed when she thought that she was knocked out by Lin Chaoqin's aura last night and passed out. There was a faint bitter taste in Li Fenglan's mouth, and he looked back to see that the quilt on the bed hadn't been pulled back all night. Li Fenglan thought, last night Lin Chaochen probably stuffed himself with a pill, threw him on the bed and hurried away. The night is dark and the wind is high, he should not have seen his own face clearly. Thinking of this, Li Fenglan couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. According to his experience, at this time Lin Chaochen should be meditating to suppress his inner demons, or busy dealing with the things he stole last night. If he doesn't want to deal with Lin Chaochen anymore, he'd better take advantage of this time to leave Yanyi Mountain. Just as she was thinking, Li Fenglan had already pushed open the door of the room. In this life, his spiritual root has been crippled, and he can't hide the spiritual energy in his body, and he can hardly control the sword. If he wanted to leave Yanyi Mountain, Li Fenglan could only go to Duxian Terrace not far away and call Ling He. Thousands of years ago, Li Fenglan was worried about his junior brother who set up his own family. He did not know how many times he had been to Yanyi Mountain. Now he can find the way to cross Xiantai with his eyes closed. But, when she was about to reach Duxiantai, Li Fenglan stopped in her footsteps. Unlike Miazhu in the snowy area, Yanyi Mountain is like spring all the year round, with pavilions, towers, pavilions and mountains and rivers interdependent, fully worthy of the word fairyland. Li Fenglan saw that a piece of yellowed talisman was pasted on the small pavilion hidden in the bamboo forest not far away. This was given to Lin Chaochen by him many, many years ago. At that time, Lin Chaochen was already a unique sword fairy in the eyes of everyone in the cultivation world. But after moving to Yanyi Mountain, he still acted like a baby to his senior brother, saying that he was not used to living here alone. Hearing his junior brother's words, Li Fenglan gave him a lot of sound transmission talismans and pasted them on the corners of Yanyi Mountain. As long as Lin Chaochen wanted to, walking anywhere in Yanyi Mountain, he could talk to Li Fenglan through the sound transmission talisman at any time, just like when his senior brother was by his side. Thousands of years ago, even if there was spiritual power attached to protect it, this piece of paper still turned yellow and curled up. It seems that as long as you stretch out your hand and touch it lightly, the talisman paper will be broken into small pieces and fall from the pavilion pillar. Li Fenglan walked over involuntarily. The sound transmission talisman had already expired, and Li Fenglan didn't know why Lin Chaochen didn't tear it off. Has it been so long that you have forgotten its original purpose? Or because the pavilion was too far away, it was forgotten by the owner? But before Li Fenglan approached, a barrier suddenly blocked him here. The moment Li Fenglan felt the fluctuation of the spiritual power on the barrier, 4 words in red and bold flashed in Li Fenglan's heart: something big is not good. Lin Chaochen didn't like being disturbed by others, so he set up a barrier on Yanyi Mountain back then. Li Fuyu, who was still his senior brother at that time, was able to get through here unimpeded, but this does not mean that Li Fenglan can also. Sure enough, the wind chimes on the pavilion shook lightly twice. A few seconds later, several young disciples wearing black robes embroidered with ZZ patterns appeared before Li Fenglan's eyes. In Tianmian Palace, there is no one who does not know them, the disciples of the law hall and the law enforcers in the sect. Who are you? How dare you trespass on Yanyi Mountain? Before Li Fenglan took half a step back, a long sword was already on his neck. Li Fenglan coughed lightly, he handed over his disciple card, pretending to be relaxed and said, "My name is Li Fenglan, I am Lin Xianzun's friend, he invited me to come here to find him yesterday." Hearing this, several disciples around looked at each other. Friend. Their tone was full of suspicion. That's right. This time Li Fenglan answered in the affirmative. He thought that as long as Lin Chaochen still wanted to hide what happened from the sky last night, he would definitely help him out with this lie. These disciples could feel that Li Fenglan didn't have much spiritual power, and they couldn't believe from the bottom of their hearts that the person in front of them could be Lin Chaoqin's friend. But Master Xianzun's actions are not something ordinary disciples can guess, and Li Fenglan's answer is so certain. After a while of silence, the sword on Li Fenglan's neck was finally retracted. Okay, but Master Xianzun is temporarily retreating today, you go to the Cliff of the Heart with us first. When Master Xianzun leaves the customs, we will tell him about this as soon as possible, and let you go out when the time is right. The disciple in black said. It has to be said that these disciples of the law hall do enforce the law impartially. But for Li Fenglan, the point is not this. The law hall and Mengzin Cliff are all owned by the same person. Meng Linzhou, the immortal master of the law, is exactly Li Fenglan's rebel in her previous life. Seeing the bare Mengzin Cliff in front of her, Li Fenglan was really disgusted. In the previous world of comprehension, he used an ancient artifact to lock him up. He didn't expect to be replaced by a dilapidated cliff after rebirth. This situation can be described with a new word he learned from the comment section of Tianmian Daos Hung, consumption downgrade. But thinking about it carefully, Li Fenglan and Wengzin Cliff are not totally unrelated. At least 1,000 years ago, Meng Linzhou, a rebel who hadn't become a law-holding immortal, was often sent here by his master to face the wall and think about his mistakes. It once became Meng Linzhou's second home. There was a light snowfall on the cliff of Mengzin, and Li Fenglan, who was sitting alone at the foot of the cliff blowing the cold wind, also took out a crane cloak from the Kyunkan bag left by the original master and put it on. His health is extremely poor. Not only is he not afraid of cold and heat like other monks, but even if he blows the mountain wind casually, he may catch a cold and lie in bed for a few days. Thinking of this, Li Fenglan couldn't help but make a note of Lin Chaochen in her heart. But at this moment, Li Fenglan suddenly saw a black shadow appearing on the cliff not far away. If it weren't for the strong barrier of the heavenly sleeping palace, he would have thought this place was haunted. Is there anyone else? Li Fenglan couldn't help muttering to herself. It turns out that there are still unlucky people like him today who were sent to this ghost place by the people of the law hall. Li Fenglan saw the person in front of the cliff, and of course that person also spotted him. Unlike Li Fenglan who stayed where she was without any intention of communicating, the person in front of the cliff got up and walked towards him after a few seconds. It was at this moment that Li Fenglan took advantage of the moonlight to see clearly the face of the visitor, and then her eyes widened involuntarily. How could it be him? Just when Li Fenglan, who had been a salted fish for 5 years after her rebirth, thought that she was far from the turmoil of her previous life. But in just 2 days, he unexpectedly met his second old friend. It turned out that the person who was sitting with me at the foot of the Mengzin cliff and blowing the cold wind was Meng Linzhou, the traitor in his previous life. I really want to come here. Not seen for more than 1,000 years, the traitor has indeed matured a lot, and his facial features seem to have become more profound. Li Fenglan saw through the veiled hat that Meng Linzhou's phoenix eyes seemed to be icy cold, and his thin lips were tightly pursed, and his whole body gave off a smell of not being close to strangers. He was dressed in black, his long hair was tied into a high ponytail on the back of his head, and Wait, what is that? Li Fenglan saw that a hairpin made of dead wood was stuck in Meng Linzhou's hair. Others may not understand what the hairpin is, but Li Fenglan recognized it at a glance. It was a branch of Wumei. Looking at the 3 realms, only the snow-covered Miashu where Li Fenglan lived in her previous life has foggy plums, and every plant is his painstaking effort. But that was 1,200 years ago. It is written in the novel that the good apprentice in front of me that year had just died on his front foot, and then set fire to Wumei with his back foot. The snowy field that was once covered with smoky plums was left with nothing but a scorched black mass. It seemed that Meng Linzhou didn't want to wait any longer. In the book, the rebel Meng Linzhou also said, Wu Mei must be watered with spiritual power. It has been raised by Li Fui for thousands of years. Who knows if it has been infected with evil spirits? Only by burning it can people feel relieved. Thinking of this, Li Fenglan couldn't help but smile when she took another look at the wooden hairpin in Meng Linzhou's hair. This traitor had never dealt with him in his previous life, and his highest goal in life seemed to be to defeat him. Unexpectedly, more than 1,000 years later, Meng Linzhou still hasn't forgotten those bad things. Burning his own Wu Mei is not enough, and he even broke dead branches and stuck them in his hair as trophies. Childish, really childish. It's a pity that he doesn't care about those extraneous things. But then again, what is Meng Linzhou doing here? Now that he is the Zongmen's law holder immortal venerable, no one has been able to punish him for a long time. Appearing here in the middle of the night, you can't be addicted to Mengzan Cliff, right? Why were you punished to come here? Meng Linzhou asked Li Fenglan before he could understand the question just now. At this moment, the night wind blew across the bottom of the cliff and stroked his veiled hat, revealing the lower half of Li Fenglan's face and dark purple scars hidden under the hat. The contours of his chin and lips are extremely beautiful, but the scar that is set off by such beauty is even more hideous. Seeing this, even Meng Linzhou couldn't help being stunned. Surprised, he actually felt that the person in front of him was somewhat familiar. From Li Fenglan's point of view, Meng Linzhou's tone was completely interrogating herself. Maybe it's because I read too many comments on Taoist in sleep. After hearing the rebel's words, Li Fenglan subconsciously thought of a word: professional habits. Although Li Fenglan was too lazy to talk to Meng Linzhou, but the way of reincarnation is good, and 1,000 years have passed, Li Fenglan is no longer the master who can send him to the cliff of Mengzan to face the wall and think about his past. People under the eaves had to bow their heads. Accidentally touched the barrier of Yanyi Mountain. Li Fenglan glanced at Meng Linzhou lazily, and replied very foolishly. Unexpectedly, after hearing his answer, the rebel who had become the law holder immortal did not ask questions, nor did he leave directly. He suddenly sneered with disdain and said, "Lin Chaochen? He's the only one who has a lot to do. Just him?" Li Fenglan remembered that Meng Linzhou and Lin Chaochen were at odds back then, but he didn't expect that after more than 1,000 years, he became a fairy and became even worse. Regarding this, Li Fenglan just wanted to say that he, well scolded. Meng Linzhou was dressed in ordinary black and concealed his cultivation, obviously because he didn't want people to know that he was the law holder immortal. It was obviously a very scary thing for an ordinary disciple to say that about Lin Chaochen. Although Li Fenglan agreed with this sentence in her heart, she coughed lightly on the surface to remind Meng Linzhou. Meng Linzhou, as if he didn't notice Li Fenglan's hint, sat beside him and added, "He's just a decent person." If Meng Linzhou was really an ordinary disciple, he could already bear the crime of big treason for saying these 4 words, and what Li Fenglan should do is to inform the law hall of his actions. It's a pity that Meng Linzhou is not an ordinary disciple. What's even more regrettable is that neither is Li Fenglan. Compared to this traitor who is always against her, Li Fenglan hates Lin Chaochen even more now. He couldn't agree more with the evaluation of sanctified. In this world, besides myself, there are still people who can see Lin Chaochen clearly. Hearing the traitor's words, Li Fenglan finally couldn't help agreeing, "That's right, I think so too." This time Meng Linzhou finally took a look at Li Fenglan. "Meng Tingli. Hey!" Li Fenglan didn't understand what it meant to be a traitor. Hearing this, Meng Linzhou repeated these 3 words, "Meng Tingli, my name." "Good fellow, is this how you deceived master with a false name?" Li Fenglan nodded and pretended not to know, "My name is Li Fenglan, and I am a disciple of Meiguang Mountain." "Oh." Meng Linzhou nodded perfunctorily. Li Fenglan can guarantee that the Meng Xianzun in front of her has 10,000% of her not knowing where Meiguang Mountain is. Meng Linzhou is like this, he always pretends to be too lazy to put on a show, let alone be polite and say nice things to others. At that time, he relied on this kind of ability to frequently come to the cliff of the heart to report. Sure enough, Meng Linzhou's next sentence was, "I haven't heard of it." Li Fenglan, oh. Thousands of years have passed, and the EQ of the trader still hasn't increased at all. Probably because he has never seen anyone as rude as himself. After hearing Li Fenglan's "oh," Meng Linzhou couldn't help but glance at Li Fenglan, who was sitting on the side. Seeing that Li Fenglan didn't have any special reaction, Meng Linzhou suddenly shook his head and said softly, "Everyone says that Lin Chaochen is a good man and righteous man, but they never thought that the person he killed back then was the senior brother who raised him with his own hands. Li Fuyu made a mistake, and everyone in the cultivation world can punish him." The man sitting next to Li Fenglan paused for a moment, and finally said the second half of the sentence, "Only him and Meng Linzhou can't do it." His voice was not loud, but it was clear enough for people to hear. This time, even Li Fenglan couldn't help but glance at Meng Linzhou in shock. In the next life, Li Fenglan herself no longer wants to recall his notoriety. So he never thought that someone in this world would say a fair word for him. Li Fenglan never thought that this person would be Meng Linzhou after all. He has always hated himself as a master. After a long silence, Li Fenglan finally nodded slightly. Seeing his reaction, Meng Linzhou, who had always had a stinky face, smiled. "You are the first person I met who dared to nod to this sentence. Amazing." After hearing Meng Linzhou's words, Li Fenglan also had to admire him as a traitor. So this is not the first time Meng Linzhou said such words? As expected of him. It's kind of funny to think about it. Meng Linzhou was notoriously rebellious and disobedient in the sect back then. Who would have expected that in the end he would actually become the lore-attaining immortal Venerable of Tianmian Palace, and even after becoming an immortal Venerable, he would still dare to say so. The bright moon rises gradually, illuminating the cliffs of the cliff of Mengzhen. Meng Linzhou just closed his eyes and sat in meditation facing the stone wall, as if he was really reflecting on something. After an unknown time, Li Fenglan suddenly heard Meng Linzhou say again, "I have a friend whom I haven't seen for many years. If he is here, he will nod when he hears what I say. Back then, I had a friend." Friend. This time, Li Fenglan dared to assure her that if that friend of Meng Linzhou was here, she would definitely nod her head when she heard what he said. "Because, I am Meng Linzhou's friend." Li Fenglan always felt that Meng Linzhou deserved the word rebel. Obviously, like Lin Chaochen, he was raised by himself, but the two walked on two completely opposite paths. Unlike Lin Chaochen, who liked to cling to himself since he was a child, Meng Linzhou has been against himself in everything since he was a teenager. When Meng Linzhou was accepted as a disciple, Li Fuyu was already the number one person in the cultivation world. And to be Li Fuyu's only apprentice, Meng Linzhou is naturally talented and has many expectations. It was Li Fuyu's first time as a master, and he didn't want a good seedling to fall into his hands, so he had very strict requirements on Meng Linzhou. And Meng Linzhou did not live up to the expectations of his master. His cultivation base has improved extremely fast, and he is fully worthy of the word genius. But while Meng Linzhou's cultivation was improving by leaps and bounds, Li Fuyu finally realized that there seemed to be something wrong with her apprentice. At that time, he didn't know how to describe what was wrong with Meng Linzhou. It wasn't until he read the novel and comments after his death that he realized that the scientific name of Meng Linzhou's problem was the second disease of middle school. Meng Linzhou's rebellious period was huge. He wanted to get out of the shadow of his master, to defeat him and make him face himself. At that time, Li Fuyu didn't know what Meng Linzhou was thinking with Lin Chaochen as an uncle teacher. As a comparison, Meng Linzhou always felt that Li Fuyu was too strict with him, and his relationship with him was not close enough. The teacher even don't smile at him often. But the young Meng Linzhou never thought that Li Fuyu was just an ordinary disciple when she took care of Lin Chaochen. But when he was accepted as an apprentice, Li Fuyu was already the number one person in the world, and the future head of Tianmian Palace, so the burden on him was heavier than before. Meng Linzhou became more and more rebellious, and it was also at this time that he began to come to Mengzan Cliff to report frequently. The little cliff of Mengzan did not trap Meng Linzhou, and left a note to the master, "Why are you teaching me?" and the young Meng Linzhou left directly to wander the world. But this is only what Meng Linzhou thought. Not long after leaving Tianmian Palace, Meng Linzhou encountered a horde of ferocious beasts and almost died in it. If it weren't for a passing casual cultivator who saved him, there would be no immortal master Shilv today. Cough cough. As for the casual cultivator, of course it was Meng Linzhou and his master Li Fuyu pretending to be. Meng Linzhou thought that his cultivation was high enough to avoid the barrier of the Tianmian Palace, so he slipped out without anyone noticing. Little did they know that Li Fuyu noticed all the little tricks he played. Seeing Meng Linzhou slipping down the mountain, Li Fuyu followed him with a touch of consciousness. Li Fuyu originally wanted Meng Linzhou to have a long memory, but when the tide of beasts broke out, he finally made a move. This rebel's mouth is a bit poisonous, but the crime is not deadly. The backstory is very simple. Meng Linzhou went down the mountain for the first time, and everything he saw was new. He said that he was wandering around the world, but in fact he was just traveling. As for Li Fuyu, who was disguised as a casual cultivator, without the burden of the sect on her body, and no longer put on the airs of a master, she was quite relaxed. During those few months, Li Fuyu and Meng Linzhou traveled all over the world's famous mountains and great rivers, and ate all kinds of delicacies, completely looking like they were not thinking about leaving. Anyone who saw that casual cultivator who only thought about eating, drinking, and having fun every day would not connect him with Li Fuyu, immortal Venerable who is aloof in Tianmian Palace. Oh, right. During that time, apart from playing around, the most important thing was that Meng Linzhou did not speak ill of Li Fuyu to his loose cultivator friends. Not only did Li Fuyu not expose him or be displeased, but she listened with great interest and echoed it from time to time. One must know that at that time Li Fuyu was the common idol of the monks of the three realms. It was the first time to see someone who, like himself, did not regard Li Fuyu as a god. After complaining, Meng Linzhou directly introduced that Sangziyu as his confidant. But to be honest, for Li Fuyu, the days when she pretended to be a traitor and wandered in the mortal world were really interesting. This can be regarded as one of the few easy times in his previous life. A few months later, Meng Linzhou felt guilty when he saw that the master didn't come to him. He finally decided to bid farewell to his casual cultivator friends and go back to the Zongmen to have a look. In late autumn, the maple forest outside Tianmian Palace looked red like a ball of fire from a distance. The boy in black asked for the last time, "Are you really unwilling to go back to Heavenly Sleeping Palace with me? With your cultivation, you will definitely be able to accomplish a lot." The man in white who was sitting on the ground stood up slowly. He smiled and patted Meng Linzhou on the shoulder and said, "I won't go, I'm used to freedom, I can't stand the rules and regulations of your Heavenly Sleep Palace." Okay. Meng Linzhou looked a bit disappointed. Just when Li Fuyu thought he was going to leave, she saw the young man raised his sword. "You are my only friend." The next moment Meng Linzhou took off the sword ear and handed it to Li Fuyu with great solemnity, "So this is for you." Li Fuyu never expected that Meng Linzhou would say such a thing to her in the end. The only friend? For the first time, Li Fuyu felt that what she did as a master was somewhat unsuccessful. By the time he realized it, Li Fuyu had already taken off her sword tassel and given it to Meng Linzhou. "Go back and listen to your master carefully. If you have anything to say, just say it. Don't run away casually. If you hadn't met me, you would have died in the tide of fierce beasts." This was the last sentence Sangziyu said to Meng Linzhou, and the traitor just tied the sword tassel proudly and said, "I'll think about it." The sword light streaked across the maple forest, and Meng Linzhou and Sangziyu said goodbye. After going through this incident, Li Fuyu originally wanted to relax the relationship with Meng Linzhou. But fate didn't give Li Fuyu time. Not long after returning to Tianmian Palace, he lost his temper. This may be one of the most regrettable things in Li Fui's last life, he has not had time to be a qualified master. Just a few months is really too short for a monk. Li Fenglan did not expect that Meng Linzhou still remembered herself. After saying that sentence just now, Meng Linzhou, who was still meditating a moment ago, suddenly stood up. Not only did he stand up, Li Fenglan even found out that he also pulled himself up with spiritual power. What's the point of staying here? I'll take you out, the Zongmen is busy now. Sure enough, Meng Linzhou was able to sneak out from Wengzhen Cliff to wander the world back then, so he can do it now. No more. Li Fenglan took 2 steps back, pretending to hesitate, and said, I'm worried that the disciples of the Law Hall will come to investigate. Hearing this, Meng Linzhou smiled disdainfully and said, No, they never care about Wengzhen Cliff. The immortal Master Jilv personally led himself to sneak out from here. This kind of behavior is not self-stealing, what else can it be? Li Fenglan knew it. It is definitely the most unreliable thing in the world for Meng Linzhou to be the law-holder immortal. He was disobedient to discipline, and hated confinement the most. Coupled with the fact that Li Fenglan was imprisoned here because of Lin Chaochen, Meng Linzhou's rebellious heart was immediately aroused. If you don't turn back at this time, when will you wait? What are you afraid of? The sky will fall and I will support it. Just after hearing Meng Linzhou's words, the scenery in front of Li Fenglan's eyes changed from the stone wall of the cliff of the heart to the flowing clouds that kept passing backwards. Meng Linzhou saw that the person in front of him was of low cultivation, so he forced him to leave here with the flying sword. This is simply a crime of knowing the law and breaking the law. Not seen for thousands of years, Meng Linzhou is already at the peak of the tribulation period. Almost instantly the two of them left the cliff of Mengzhen and arrived at the main peak of Tian Shui Palace. Before I know it, the sun has risen. Different from the bare Mengzhen cliff, the bustle here on the main peak is like another different world. Li Fenglan saw a huge white jade lotus platform floating in the open space in front of the main peak. The white jade platform turned slowly, and golden light continued to emit. The competition on the stage is in full swing, while the audience is full of monks from various sects. Since her rebirth, Li Fenglan has been staying on Meiguang Mountain. He was used to being lonely, but he felt a little uncomfortable seeing the scene in front of him. It was also after seeing this incomparably lively scene that Li Fenglan did some calculations and found out that it turned out to be the day when the Zongmen conference was held recently. According to the novel Taoist of Sleeping in Heaven, this sect conference lasted for many days, and all the leaders of the cultivation world were present. It is only 1,205 years since Li Fui's soul disappeared, and those bigwigs in the cultivation world are naturally all his old acquaintances. Meng Linzhou, a traitor, really doesn't suit me. Fortunately, he felt that this rebel had matured a lot just now, but he didn't expect that this bad habit of joining in the fun has not been corrected until today. Just as he was talking, Meng Xianzun had used his spiritual power to cover up his appearance, and he stood beside him and looked towards the stage with great interest. Li Fenglan felt that sneaking away from Yanyi Mountain yesterday was really the worst decision she had made since her rebirth. But in the final analysis, Lin Chaochen, the unlucky junior, was to be blamed. Just when he was secretly annoyed, celestial music suddenly sounded in Li Fenglan's ears, and he saw a fairy maidservant appearing in the sky accompanied by a black wooden boat from a distance. Those fairy maidservants are all puppets made of paper talismans. Before Li Fenglan could see clearly who the people on the boat were, a sense of coercion came over, making all the people standing on the ground bow their heads. Cough cough cough. Li Fenglan's spiritual roots were all crippled, and she couldn't withstand such a powerful coercion. There was a sudden burning pain in his chest, but the pain didn't last long. The next moment, a hand was lightly placed on Li Fenglan's back, sending a little spiritual power to him. Cough, thank you. Meng Linzhou said very reassuringly. The ebony boat came down slowly, and this time Li Fenglan finally saw clearly the people on board. He was dressed in red, and his facial features were exquisite and picturesque, but there was always a sense of restlessness between his eyebrows and eyes. Sure enough, when you come to the Zongmen conference, you will meet acquaintances. It's just that Li Fenglan never thought that he would be the first person she met at the meeting. Cheng Duan, the youngest son of the master of Mingzhen sect, the third sect in the cultivation world. Li Fenglan also saved Cheng Duan's life back then. Before he went mad, Ming Zhenzong used this incident to make friends. Of course, only before the accident. After Li Fenglan became mad, Ming Zhenzong ran faster than anyone else. More than 1,200 years ago, the great powers of the cultivation world joined forces to lay down the god formation to kill Li Fuyu. If he was serious about holding grudges, most of the people who came to the Zongmen conference would be considered his enemies. But only when she saw the man in red, Li Fenglan couldn't help scolding him in her heart. Cheng Duan, are you happy being a thief? Li Fenglan tried her best to suppress her anger, closed her eyes gently and recalled the plot. Li Fuyu's body fell into the glacier after his death in the previous life. The river was too fast and could swallow spiritual energy, so it was difficult to find him for a while. The Mingzhen sect where Cheng Duan belongs happens to have a fairy artifact, which can prevent spiritual power from being swallowed by the glacier. So even though he was not from Tianmian Palace, nor was he a great power in the cultivation world, he still took that fairy artifact and joined the team looking for Li Fuyu's body. In the end, it was indeed Cheng Duan who found Li Fuyu. However, not only did he not want to give Li Fuyu the last respect for him for saving him, he even had evil thoughts. Taking advantage of everyone's unpreparedness, Cheng Duan dug away Li Fuyu's Dao heart from Li Fuyu's corpse. Immediately afterwards, his cultivation base skyrocketed, and the dandy young master who had never been taken seriously became a great power of the Ming Xin sect. But who would have thought that after stealing the Dao heart, Cheng Duan had Li Fuyu's aura on him, so he didn't dare to leave the sect at will. In order to facilitate activities, Cheng Duan created a clone puppet to walk around the world, and that puppet had a drop of Li Fuyu's heart and soul in it. So, the man in red in front of him is actually Cheng Duan's clone. Li Fenglan will not let her Dao heart remain in the hands of others. The old wounds of this body are hard to heal, and the spiritual root is completely abolished. If he could get his Dao heart back, he would be able to completely mend his spiritual roots. If you don't take it, you don't take it for nothing, let alone this Dao heart is originally mine. Although Li Fenglan had long ago decided to cut off the turmoil of her past life, she would just be a salted fish. But this does not mean that he, who was once the number one person in the cultivation world, is willing to be a useless person for the rest of his life. Cheng Duan has already cultivated in the transcending tribulation period, and Li Fenglan is no match for him now. So before getting back his Dao heart, he had better kill this clone first and get back his heart. After the spirit veins and cultivation base recover a bit, then go to find Cheng Duan's real body. Speaking of which, in terms of cultivation alone, Li Fenglan was also no match for Cheng Duan's clone. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have other options, for example, formation. Few people know that Li Fuyu, a swordsman in his previous life, also has a lot of research on formations. He planned to set up a formation in Meiguang Mountain, which he was most familiar with and also one of the most remote areas of Tianmian Palace. At that time, as long as Cheng Duan's clone can be attracted, it will be easy to get back his heart and soul. Worried about being searched for souls, the memories of Cheng Duan's real body and clone are not connected. And it was at the time of the Zongmen conference, there were so many powerful people in Tianmian Palace, each of them had strong spiritual consciousness, and their avatars did not dare to send messages back casually. This is just convenient for Li Fenglan to do it. As long as he can kill the man in front of him and prevent him from going back to Ming Zhenzong, then his identity will not be exposed. It's just, how to attract Cheng Duan. While looking at the people on the stage, Li Fenglan thought about this question carefully, and at the same time, her fingers subconsciously tangle the long hair that was loose behind her back. The man didn't realize what he was doing, but Meng Linzhou, who was standing beside him, couldn't help but a flash of shock flashed in his eyes. He is too familiar with Li Fenglin's movements. Thousands of years ago, there was also a person who liked to gently twist his long hair when he was thinking about problems. Perhaps thinking of that person, Meng Linzhou suddenly said, "Do you know what you can get if you win this competition?" The sect conference lasted for many days, and the competition on the White Jade Lotus platform was just one of the activities. All monks below nascent soul can participate in this event. After a few days of competition, a winner will be determined among monks of each level. In the end, the sect with the most winners will get a reward. This year's Zongmen conference is held in Tianmian Palace, and the rewards are of course provided by Tianmian Palace. What? He asked curiously. Li Fenglin really doesn't know about this. The plot of Taoist in Heaven is not so detailed, and she has been staying in Meiguang Mountain before, so she doesn't know what happened outside. The green leaf bracelet. After saying these 3 words, Meng Linzhou became quiet. I don't know if it was an illusion, but Li Fenglin actually felt that this traitor was a little bit lonely. But he had no time to pay attention to Meng Linzhou's strange emotions. It's actually a green leaf bracelet? There is a small world inside this bracelet, but the area is not big, and it is full of standard buildings, which seems a bit unattractive to Li Fenglin. But despite this, it is also a fairy artifact. After his death in Taoism, Tianmian Palace took Li Fuiu's relics back to the treasure pavilion, and the green leaf bracelet was one of them. Unexpectedly, Tianmian Palace took it out again today, and it became the prize of the Zongmen conference. Is this intentional or unintentional? Li Fenglin has no interest in delving into this issue for the time being. After hearing those 3 words just now, he understood the purpose of Chengduan's avatar's trip. Stealing the hearts of others is not without paying a price. Although there are various top-level spiritual treasures suppressing them these years, Chengduan's true energy still frequently goes retrograde, almost to the limit. The green leaf bracelet was once worn by Li Fuiu, and his aura still remains on it, so it is perfect for suppressing Dao Xin. Thinking of this, Li Fenglin sneered with a little disdain. The green leaf bracelet is not important to him, and it is not of much use to anyone except Chengduan. This was originally just a competition for monks below Yuanying, and the major sects would not care. Not to mention that Ming Xinzong would not send out a powerful person to sit on the spot like Ming Xinzong. Therefore, Li Fenglin guessed that Chengduan's presence here, apart from boosting morale, would probably also secretly do some tricks to win for his disciples. At this moment, Li Fenglin suddenly heard a scream. I saw a flash of sword light, and a man in green clothes suddenly stepped back, and finally fell heavily from the White Jade Lotus platform. The Zongmen General Assembly has always been closed, and such a situation is very rare. The monk of Ming Xinzong who was still standing on the lotus platform smiled, and said arrogantly, "So this is the strength of your Tianmian Palace? It's nothing more than that." The person in Xingyi was seriously injured, and there was chaos under the lotus stage. But those disciples of Ming Xinzong cheered together. It turns out that the people in Tianmian Palace can't help beating them so much. I think the name First Sect should be replaced by our Mingxin Sect. The man on the black wooden boat finally spoke. Holding his wine glass, he said with a smile, "The green leaf bracelet has been dusty for many years, I think there should be a worthy owner." The disciples of Ming Xin Sect in the audience cheered even louder, but everyone else fell silent. People from all sects and sects present knew that the last owner of the green leaf bracelet was Li Fuiu. It's just that no matter what they say about Li Fuiu behind their backs, they dare not say such a thing on the site of Tianmian Palace. Li Fuiu almost became the head of the Tianmian Palace. These words are really too unfair. Give Tianmian Palace face. Even though she stayed in Meiguang Mountain all the time, Li Fenglin also heard that after what happened to her back then, Tianmian Palace deliberately kept a low profile. Ming Xinzong took advantage of this time to expand rapidly. These disciples who have just entered the sect are all confident and scary. Even many young disciples no longer regard other sects in their eyes. In the realm of comprehension, strength is the most important thing, and the confidence of Ming Zenzong disciples comes from Cheng Duan. Cheng Duan's confidence comes from the Dao heart he stole from Li Fuyu. Is Ming Zenzong going to win? Li Fenglan heard that there were disciples around, asking the senior sister cautiously. Almost, said the taller female cultivator, pursing her lips. The current competition in the foundation building period is the last round. Already reached the last game? Li Fenglan suddenly cast her gaze on the white jade lotus platform. He didn't care if the green leaf bracelet would be taken away by Ming Zenzong. What Li Fenglan has to do today is to lure that clone to Meiguang Mountain. If Cheng Duan wanted to go to Meiguang Mountain, he must first make him notice himself. In the competition on the white jade lotus platform, kicking is allowed. Just when the person in charge of adjudicating the competition was about to announce the victory of the Mingzhen sect disciple, a man suddenly stepped into the teleportation formation, and appeared on the lotus platform in a blink of an eye, causing a burst of exclamation from the audience. Li Fenglan's movements were so fast that even Meng Linzhou, who was standing beside him, couldn't help being stunned for a moment. Why did he come on stage suddenly? Going to the arena for a competition after a disagreement, he really deserves to be sent to Mengzhen Cliff for self-reflection. Meng Linzhou likes this kind of rebellion. Li Fenglan on the stage didn't see that the traitor, who had shown a lack of interest just now, suddenly became agitated. Speaking carefully, although Li Fenglan's spiritual roots were completely abolished and her cultivation could not be improved, at least the original owner successfully built the foundation. Li Fenglan has incomparable swordsmanship and experience. For other foundation building disciples, this is simply a blow to dimensionality reduction. Since this is a competition in the foundation building period, of course Li Fenglan will not miss it. The people of Ming Zenzong were stunned for a moment, and they all said in disdain, "How dare you come up to challenge such a spiritual root? Ha ha ha, Tian Shui Palace is indeed deserted." And the Tianmian Palace disciple who saw the state of Li Fenglan's spiritual root gritted his teeth and stood there with a face of forbearance. Obviously, most people also think that way in their hearts, but it's hard to say it because of the sex face. As for Li Fenglan's opponent, he smiled disdainfully. The man in front of me looks sick, and he struggles to lift his sword. He still wants to fight me like this? Have you thought about it? If you die on stage, it's none of my business. The man challenged. Li Fenglan glanced at him indifferently, stood on the spot and took a steady breath, seeing that a gust of wind could blow him down. The Tianmian Palace people under the stage have already closed their eyes, unwilling to watch the scene for a while. However, just when everyone thought that Li Fenglan would definitely lose, he suddenly took out a spirit sword from the Qunkan bag that he carried with him, and the next moment, without waiting for the disciple of Ming Zenzong to react, he directly stabbed towards the opponent's chest. Li Fenglan's speed was too fast, and his swordsmanship was so exquisite that the opponent had no time to react. At this moment, whether the spiritual power is strong or not seems to be unimportant. Before the other monks could react, Meng Linzhou, who was pretending to be an ordinary disciple, shouted loudly, "Good swordsmanship!" Why didn't Li Fenglan realize that this traitor still likes to make noises? It seems that after he disguised his identity, he was completely released. From this point of view, Meng Linzhou and Li Fuyu really deserve to be a pair of mentor and apprentice. Meng Linzhou's voice came down, and the monks of Tianmian Palace who saw Li Fenglan's disciple card on his waist also became excited. They could see that Li Fenglan's health was extremely poor, and there was almost no spiritual energy stored in her spiritual veins. But his swordsmanship is extremely brilliant, and none of his men's moves are superfluous. The man in white danced gracefully in the air like a butterfly, and with just 3 swords, he dismantled all the tricks of the Ming Zenzong disciple. The opponent fell to the ground, staring at the sword pointing at the tip of his nose, his eyes widened and trembling, he couldn't say a word. From the beginning to the end, Li Fenglan didn't use much spiritual power at all. Chengduan's avatar on the black wooden boat suddenly stood up. It's impossible. Just like in the previous competitions, he originally wanted to secretly help the disciples of Ming Zhenzong. But before he could make a move, Li Fenglin's sword tip actually hit the opponent's throat. You lost. Li Fenglin said lightly, holding back the fishy sweetness in her throat. Under the hood, Li Fenglin's face was as pale as paper, but none of the people beside Bai Yulian's stage could see that he was not in good condition. The Ming Zhenzong disciples in the audience all stood there without saying a word. Cheng Duan gritted his teeth. In fact, according to the winning percentage, the green leaf bracelet is already destined to be in his pocket. But the disastrous defeat of the disciples of the sect still made the man in red feel extremely ashamed. Just when he was about to secretly teach Li Fenglin a lesson, the chest of Chengduan's avatar suddenly felt throbbing pain, and the true energy in his body showed signs of retrograde again. Is he? The man in red subconsciously stroked his hand to his chest, and took 2 steps back. Seeing that the Mingzhen sect stopped talking, the monk in charge of judging finally stepped forward and announced Li Fenglin's victory. From the corner of her eye, Li Fenglin saw that the people on the black wooden boat stood there in a daze. He knew that he had attracted the man's attention. Although there is only a drop of Li Fu's heart and soul in this avatar, when he uses his spiritual power, he definitely feels it. Chengduan would never have imagined that Li Fu, who had been shattered from her soul, would be able to be reborn. 90% of him would think that the man in white in front of him was a descendant of Li Fu's mortal family, with the same blood flowing from his body. And if he could exchange blood with Li Fu's family, then the Dao heart in Cheng Duan's body would be settled again. The man in red already had a plan in his heart. The moves just now seemed easy, but in fact, the spiritual power in Li Fenglin's body had been exhausted. Just as he was trying to support his body with the sword and was about to recover before going down the lotus platform, a black shadow suddenly appeared beside Li Fenglin. The wide black robe blocked all sights of Li Fenglin. Accompanied by a burst of familiar light fragrance, the man put his arms around his shoulders, and then gently took him away from the lotus platform. Are you okay? Li Fenglin heard that the rebel's voice suddenly became extremely gentle. Ahem, it's okay, it's just that the consumption is a bit high. Meng Linzhou finally let go of Li Fenglin. But Li Fenglin looked up and saw that she had already been taken by the other party to another mountain away from the lotus terrace. Seeing this, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. After a while of silence, Meng Linzhou helped him sit on a stone bench beside him, then suddenly looked at Li Fenglin and asked, "Why are you on stage?" This question is somewhat difficult to answer. Of course Li Fenglin can't say that she is trying to attract Chengduan's attention. There was no other way. Facing the traitor who couldn't be fooled for the time being, Li Fenglin finally choked out a sentence, "You might not believe it. Okay. You may not quite understand." What? Li Fenglin took a deep breath and said, "I have always admired, Senior Li Fu." Although no one would recognize it under a different shell, Li Fenglin was still a little embarrassed to say this. Meng Linzhou, a traitor, never accepted himself since he was a child. When Li Fu was the #1 person in the cultivation world and was highly respected, he always felt disdainful about it. Therefore, Li Fenglin felt that after hearing what she said, Meng Linzhou would no longer have a close friendship with him. But what he never expected was that as soon as Li Fenglin saw her words, Meng Linzhou's eyes suddenly lit up. He said, "Coincidentally, me too." Li Fenglin? The same to you? Li Fenglin thought that she had misjudged this traitor before. More than 1,200 years have passed, and Meng Linzhou's rebellious period is still not over. Now that Li Fu is being beaten by everyone in the cultivation world, Meng Linzhou has started to confront everyone again. It's boring. Li Fenglin's spiritual energy was exhausted, and it was Meng Linzhou who finally sent him back to Meiguang Mountain. How do you live in such a broken place? As soon as he arrived at Meiguang Mountain, Meng Linzhou came up and said with disgust when he saw a few small buildings hidden in the middle of the mountain and couldn't be found without looking for them. Fortunately, it's relatively quiet. Except that Lin Chaochen might fall from the sky, Li Fenglan silently added in her heart. Meng Linzhou looked around again, and then asked as if he suddenly remembered something, "Are you alone?" "Well," Li Fenglan nodded and said, "My master is in retreat, and there is an uncle who is not often in the section." Meng Linzhou was not interested in his school at all. He had probably seen Miguang Mountain once, and he was going to chat with Li Fenglan about the other party's performance on the Bayou Lotus stage just now. But to Li Fenglan's rejoicing, this time before Meng Linzhou had time to speak, the disciple card hanging on his waist suddenly let out a soft sound. Finally, the law hall is busy. Li Fenglan was secretly happy. There are so many things. Seeing this, Meng Linzhou complained directly without any burden. From Li Fenglan's point of view, the traitor has almost written the 3 characters "I'm bored to death" on his face. He glanced at Li Fenglan and said, "I have something to do, I will come to you in a few days." "Okay, hurry up and get busy, the sex business is more important." Li Fenglan turned around and walked along the way Meng Linzhou had come along as she spoke, almost writing the word "seeing off" on her face. Although he could see Li Fenglan's impatience, Meng Linzhou, who had something to do, still left here reluctantly. Seeing him walking away with the sword, Li Fenglan finally breathed a sigh of relief, and slowly walked back to her residence. The competition on the Bai Yulian stage just now was Li Fenglan's first time lifting a sword after her rebirth. Although this sword is just an ordinary spirit sword that can be seen everywhere in the cultivation world, after returning to the residence, Li Fenglan couldn't help but wipe it carefully. To be honest, he did miss those years of holding swords in the past. But he was indeed tired of the turmoil in the cultivation world. If it wasn't for Chengduan's attention today, Li Fenglan thought that she would never touch the sword again in this lifetime. Li Fenglan couldn't help but sighed softly, and then put the long sword back into the Qunkan bag. The original owner can be said to be poor and white. He only has a Qunkan bag, which was given by the master before the retreat. But having said that, although Li Fenglan himself is extremely poor, after looking at the Qunkan bag, he found that his master is definitely a rich man. There are many things in the Qunkan bag that he has never seen even in his last life. This time Li Fenglan planned to use the spirit treasures in the bag to set up the formation. The Zongmen conference has been held for several days, and the day when Chengduan leaves here is getting closer. Li Fenglan guessed that the other party would investigate herself thoroughly today, and would come to Miguang Mountain at the earliest night. All he had to do was to arrange the formation and wait here for Chengduan to throw himself into the trap. It's just that, before Li Fenglan started to set up the formation, Miguang Mountain, which had hardly been visited by anyone in the past 5 years, unexpectedly welcomed a visitor. "Fenglan, I heard that you are on the White Jade Lotus platform today." Following the sound, I saw a man in a dark purple brocade robe leaning against the door, looking sideways at him with a smile. The man's purple clothes were extremely gorgeous, and even the long tassels of the purple gold crown on his head were decorated with spirit stones. It stands to reason that such a dress will definitely overshadow the master's limelight. However, not only was the visitor not overwhelmed by this fine attire, but his demeanor was even more flamboyant. Rather than saying that he is a monk, it is better to say that he is like a dandy in the world, or some kind of nobleman. The fact is almost the same in the eyes of Li Fenglan and even everyone who knows him. The man in front of him really doesn't want to be a monk. If Li Fenglan remembered correctly, when the novel was about to end, the person in front of her directly practiced and sentenced Tianmian Palace. "Uncle, why are you here?" Li Fenglan stood up and greeted him. The original owner has only one uncle, his name is Mo Senjiu. During the 5 years after Li Fenglan's rebirth, the man spent at least 4.5 years playing around in the mortal world. No matter whether it is placed in Tianmian Palace or the entire cultivation world, Mo Senjiu is considered an outlier. In the past 2 days when the Zongmen conference was held, Mo Senjaihu temporarily returned to Tianmian Palace. He has always disliked the boring Meiguang Mountain, and he usually went to other places after giving birth, only occasionally coming over to have a look or two. It's nothing serious. I heard that you were famous on the White Jade Lotus Terrace, so I came here to take a look. Mo Senjaihu shrugged and said. Li Fenglan smiled and said, then you have seen it. Uncle Shi finally went back to the sect, why don't you go to other places to find friends to catch up on the past? It stands to reason that Li Fenglan should have a few words of greeting with his uncle, but when he saw this person in front of him, he only thought about how to see him off. Apart from Li Fenglan's hasty formation, there was another more important reason behind this. In fact, the original Li Fenglan has nothing to do with the word useless. There are very few cultivators of the heavenly spirit root in this world. Li Fuiu counts as one, and Li Fenglan counts as one. Or, the former Li Fenglan. It stands to reason that he who possesses the heavenly spiritual root shouldn't be so unknown. But not long after the original owner entered the sect, an accident happened. At that time, he had just established his foundation, and was leaving the heavenly sleeping palace with other disciples of the sect to eliminate demons and defend the Tao. Unexpectedly, there was an accident on the way back. The original owner, who didn't have much actual combat experience, was seriously injured by a ferocious beast. Not only did he lose half his life on the spot, but even his appearance was mostly ruined. Although the master of the original owner saved his life back, it is difficult to mend the ruined spiritual roots. It is rare to see Tianligan disciples, but it is not so rare in Tianmian Palace, the largest sect in the cultivation world. When the original owner was accepted into the sect, many people knew that there was another genius disciple beside them. But after a long time without any news of him, people gradually forgot about it, and even more forgot about his existence. In the world of comprehension, such things as hurting Zhongyang are very common. In addition, there are not many plots related to the original owner in Tianmian Daos Hung. The author only briefly mentioned Li Fenglan's accidental death through the mouth of other supporting characters at the end. As for what this accident was, the author did not introduce it. After all, Li Fenglan is not an important person. The only useful information is that when he died unexpectedly, he was staying with his uncle. That uncle is the purple-clothed man Mo Heiu standing in front of Li Fenglan's eyes. So in order to save her life, the only thing Li Fenglan did after her rebirth was to stay away from the original owner's uncle, Mo Zhenaiu, and try her best to avoid that unexpected accident. Although it is a blessing not a disaster, it is a disaster that cannot be avoided. But at least some hints are given in the novel. Li Fenglan still needs to pay attention to it. Even if it has a high probability of being useless. Thinking of the rebirth, Li Fenglan standing here couldn't help but frowned again. The man's hand slowly stroked his left shoulder. Although he didn't feel it, he still knew that there was a strange fairy bone here. This fairy bone always reminded Li Fenglan that his rebirth was not an accident, but someone did it on purpose. But to this day, Li Fenglan still doesn't know who the person who picked out the immortal bone and helped him to be reborn is. He even didn't know why the other party revived him. This is also what Li Fenglan cares most about after her rebirth. He never likes to owe others anything. The cause and effect of rebirth after picking out the immortal bones is too great, and he will not be able to rest assured if he does not return it. After all, Li Fenglan firmly believes that there will never be pies in the sky, and if there are any, they will not fall on her own head. Sooner or later, he will find this person who resurrected himself. Just as he was thinking, the man who was standing leisurely by the door just now approached Li Fenglan like a ghost. Just waiting for the next moment, the hand holding the silver folding fan appeared in Li Fenglan's heart. Li Fenglan subconsciously leaned back, barely avoiding the folding fan. Ahem, ahem. Uncle, what do you mean? It's not interesting. Mo Senjaihu put away the folding fan in his hand as if suddenly changing his face, and at the same time approached Li Fenglan as if nothing had happened. The man suddenly approached, and whispered in Li Fenglan's ear, I'm just surprised, my nephew has such a good ability, why didn't I know it before? After finishing the sentence just now, the man caressed Li Fenglin's long hair with great interest. But Li Fenglin took 2 steps back subconsciously and said, Uncle Master has not been in the sect, of course he doesn't know. Mo Senjiu has been wandering in the world, and he doesn't know himself as a nephew at all. That's right. The man smiled and took his hand back, and nodded in approval. He sat down at the table and poured himself a cup of tea in a very unobtrusive manner. Li Fenglin finally breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't know what Mo Zhenyu saw just now, or if he had other purposes. In other words, Li Fenglin never understood Mo Zhenyu. The man in front of him played games in the world and never played his cards according to the routine. Whenever facing him, Li Fenglin always felt like a prey being played by a big cat. Obviously, in his previous life, when he was chased and killed by the masters of the cultivation world, he didn't feel this way. Mo Senjiu despised Meiguang Mountain for being boring, so he stood up after drinking that cup of tea, and it seemed that he was going to find fun elsewhere. And just when Li Fenglin sent the man in purple to the door, Mo Heu suddenly turned around and winked at him and said with a smile, I remember that Fenglin was seriously injured once, and since then she has stopped building foundations and can't do anything about cultivation. Diligent. Li Fenglin nodded. He didn't understand why Mo Zhenyu suddenly brought up this matter. So the nephew might as well let go of his obsession and go to the world to be at ease. It turned out that Mo Zhenyu thought that Li Fenglin was unwilling to be reconciled after being injured, so she worked hard and practiced hard, and her swordsmanship was outstanding. But having said that, only Mo Zhenyu can persuade people not to practice in Tianmian Palace. Even Li Fenglin, who considers herself a salty fish, is willing to bow down in terms of mentality. After saying that, Mo Heu turned around and left. Looking at his back gradually going away, Li Fenglin couldn't help but think that as a teacher, 8 out of 10 sentences of her were joking, but the sentence of advising him not to cultivate hard was definitely sincere. After all, Mo Senjiu himself was practicing it. It's just that it is said in Taoist of Sleeping in Heaven that although Mo Senjiu is unwilling to cultivate hard, he has outstanding talent and his cultivation level is even more unpredictable. People like him urging others to let go of their obsessions sounded a little bit harsh. Li Fenglin was cautious in doing things, until she watched Mo Senjiu Yujian leave Meiguang Mountain and saw his figure completely disappear into the sea of clouds, then turned back to the house. After closing the door tightly, Li Fenglin took out the universe bag left by the original master. There are a lot of spiritual stones in this bag. Li Fenglin's spiritual roots are completely useless, and he cannot support the operation of a formation with his own strength. Thanks to the Qunkan bag, he was able to deploy the formation smoothly. Speaking of which, the master of the original owner started retreating before Li Fenglin was reborn. 5 years is too short for a monk, and Li Fenglin doesn't know when his master will come out. In the original owner's memory, although his master adopted a semi-stocking model for his apprentices, he was always generous. Especially after the original owner was injured, the master gave a lot of self-defense spiritual treasures. So while taking out the contents of the Qunkan bag, it was rare for Li Fenglin to sincerely say thank you to his retreating master in his heart. The next moment Li Fenglin frowned and cut her finger with the spirit sword she just took out. The man slowly closed his eyes and chanted the mantra, blood dripping onto the ground drop by drop. The dark red runes magically formed by spiritual power covered the ground in an instant. Looking out of the window, Meiguang Mountain suddenly flashed a red light, which gradually disappeared after a long time. The small building returned to its usual appearance. The man standing in the middle of the room slowly opened his eyes and let out a long breath. The formation cloth is finally ready. Cheng Duan's cultivation was stolen from Li Fuyu, he would not cherish it, let alone study any array technique. This formation is not complicated, but Li Fenglin believes that it is more than enough to deal with Cheng Duan's clone puppet. It was night, and the small building on the hillside of Meiguang Mountain seemed to have fallen asleep along with the dense forest. No one saw that a dark red sword light suddenly crossed the night sky and disappeared into the forest. Lying on the bed, Li Fenglan gently closed her eyes, as if she had fallen into a deep sleep. At this moment, a dark red figure suddenly appeared in this small building. Chengduan's avatar puppet really came here just as Li Fenglan guessed. Unlike in the daytime, the man standing in the small building had sharp eyebrows, full of killing intent. He paused for a moment, and without hesitation for a second, he conjured a dagger from his hand and walked towards the bed. Li Fenglan was unusually stable when she was sleeping, with his hands resting lightly on the quilt. A ray of moonlight happened to come in from outside the window. From a distance, these white and graceful hands seemed to be formed by the condensed moonlight. Seeing this, the man in red couldn't help but pause. He planned to directly cut Li Fenglan's wrist with the dagger, and draw the opponent's blood into his body. But after seeing those hands, the man in red couldn't help but look upwards. Li Fenglan had a hideous dark purple scar on his face, so he wore a veiled hat during the day. Now that there was no veil to cover him, the man in red could finally see his face clearly. Pale and fragile. These two words rushed into the mind of the man in red in an instant. The man's facial features are extremely delicate, and under the moonlight, they are so beautiful that they are somewhat illusory. And the dark purple scar on his face was also set off to be particularly ferocious. The man in red froze here on the spot. Apart from the extreme collision of beauty and ugliness, he actually saw a bit of that man's shadow on Li Fenglan's body. Li Fuyu. As his avatar, he naturally has memories of the past. In fact, the original owner has no blood relationship with Li Fuyu in the previous life. The reason why Li Fenglan's face is similar to his in the previous life is only because his spirit is too powerful, which gradually affects his appearance. Seeing this face which was somewhat similar to Li Fuyu's, the man in red standing by the bed finally remembered today's business. He wants to exchange blood with Li Fenglan. No matter how much the person in front of him looks like Li Fuyu, he is not him. He even does not allow people similar to Li Fuyu to exist in this world. Chengduan walked to the side of the bed expressionlessly, then leaned over and cut Li Fenglan's wrist without hesitation. Hiss, it hurts. Li Fenglan couldn't help but secretly scolded Chengduan in her heart, and made a note of the thief. Drops of blood rolled down from Li Fenglan's wrist. Li Fenglan's wrist was slender and pale, so the bright red blood beads were particularly conspicuous. Chengduan was stunned for a moment. Just when he took a deep breath and was about to cut his wrist, with a tick, another drop of blood hit the ground. At the next moment, dense dark red lines suddenly appeared on the black ground, which looked extremely strange. What is this? Chengduan couldn't help but widen his eyes, wanting to step back. However, before he could move, the dark red lines on the ground had already sprouted, locking Chengduan's body here like vines. At this time, Li Fenglan, who was lying on the bed, finally opened her eyes slowly, and got up and sat on the side of the bed. Chengduan was imprisoned in place by the red spiritual power. He gritted his teeth fiercely, and asked Li Fenglan with a slightly trembling voice, "Who are you?" The man sitting by the bed was dressed in white, and his clothes and his entire face were already glowing red. Li Fenglan's delicate facial features became more and more brilliant. Even the originally hideous scars have turned into decorations at this moment. He didn't answer Chengduan's question, coughed twice, leaned against the lattice beside the bed and said, "You are not Chengduan's real body." Before Li Fenglan finished speaking, the man opposite stabbed him with a dagger. However, the weird vines growing from the ground had already spread to the man's chest, and before the dagger touched Li Fenglan, his upper body could no longer move. Not only that, the Genkai in Chengduan's body went retrograde again, and his chest hurt like a fire. Li Fenglan stood up slowly, and effortlessly drew the dagger from the man in red. "Cheng Xianjun, what do you, a distinguished guest, come to Meiguang Mountain in the middle of the night?" Li Fenglan asked with a smile while playing with the dagger. Of course, the man in red would not answer Li Fenglan's question. The existence of the formation that traps him has already clearly told him, Li Fenglan knows her plan. Or, everything in front of him is simply a trap set up by Li Fenglan. Who the are you? Chengduan asked again with an extremely frightened expression. The man could feel that the spiritual power in his body was draining little by little, it seemed to be sucked away by this weird formation. The retrograde of true qi became more and more violent, and the drop of blood on the chest of the man in red seemed to be boiling. At this moment, the dagger in Li Fenglan's hand finally landed slowly on the man's chest. He raised his head, smiled and said, "Me? I'm just the master of your heart and soul." The hands and feet of the man in red became extremely cold in an instant, and even breathing became difficult. He looked at the opposite person in disbelief, and with a broken breath in his throat, he finally said the name after a long while, Li Fuyu. At the same time, in the shadow hall of Mingzenzong, the man in the red pendant jade brocade robe spat out a mouthful of blood. He who was meditating suddenly opened his eyes. The man's brows and eyes were raised slightly, and his lips were still stained with blood, making him look bright and seductive. The stone bell in the hall rang quickly, and Chengduan knew at a glance that something had happened to his avatar. But the man didn't have time to think about what happened to the clone. Because of his influence, the Genkai of Chengduan's body also began to collide indiscriminately in his body. It felt like a stabbing knife, and it was extremely painful, but in addition to the pain, Chengduan actually slowly pressed his hand on his chest, and then laughed. Pain and happiness intertwined on his face, which looked very strange. Chengduan was afraid of the retrograde qi, and he was even more afraid that his heart would be broken if he couldn't bear the retrograde qi. And the reason why he laughed was because it was also only at this moment that Chengduan could clearly realize that Li Fuyu's Dao heart was still living in his body. Chengduan is the youngest child of the suzerain of Mingzhen sect. He has never concealed that he is an ambitious person who will do anything to achieve his goals. But it's a pity that Chengdu Engkong has ambitions. His spiritual route was so mediocre, even if he took pills for food, Chengduan's cultivation still stagnated completely after giving birth. Chengduan always thought that it would be fine if he was born in an ordinary family, had no contact with cultivation, or was not the son of the Mingzhen sect's suzerain. In this way, he will never have a chance to see the Dao in his life, let alone know the vastness of the world. But Chengduan knew it. He thought that his sense of powerlessness and despair was beyond the reach of ordinary people. Until that day, a secret realm opened. Legend has it that there is an ancient sacred tree growing in the secret realm. As long as you eat the spiritual fruit on the tree, you can cleanse your tendons and cut your marrow, and become a heavenly root. Of course Chengduan would not miss this opportunity. This secret place is very dangerous. Chengduan went there with disciples of Mingzenzong. Those disciples have higher cultivation bases than him, so it is better to say that they entered the secret realm together to protect him than to explore the secret realm together. It's a pity that even so, before arriving at the location of the legendary ancient sacred tree, the rest of the team still died on the way. Thousands of years have passed, and Chengduan still cannot forget the scene of that day. He stood in front of a huge black mountain with a long sword in his hand, and after a few seconds he began to retreat quickly. At this moment, the mountain moved unexpectedly. It was only at this time that the people in front of the mountain could see clearly that it was not a mountain, but a fierce beast lying on the ground. When the beast saw Chengduan, its golden vertical pupils flickered twice, then opened its mouth and quickly came towards Chengduan's place. This is a fairy-level ferocious beast, whose power is almost equal to that of a human monk who has passed through the tribulation period. There is no doubt that Chengduan will die. Even though he knew he couldn't avoid it, the man still gritted his teeth and wanted Yu Jian to escape from here. After seeing his movements, the fierce beast only slapped it lightly with its tail, and Chengduan fell from the sky. Lying on the ground, he could feel the entire continent trembling due to the movement of the beast. Chengduan is not a person who accepts his fate easily, but at this moment he couldn't help but close his eyes. However, while closing his eyes, he heard a deafening roar. The next moment the ground shook. When the man opened his eyes, he saw that the huge black beast staggered back, and finally fell straight to the ground. This is... Chengduan had never seen such a scene before. It took a few seconds until the smoke and dust cleared before he could see clearly that someone had pierced the throat of the beast with a sword. Even Chengduan had never seen such a powerful force. Li Fuyu, who was dressed in white clothes better than the snow, just wiped off the blood on the long sword, and walked slowly towards Chengduan. And it was at this moment that Chengduan fell in love with the person in front of him. Yes, love. Chengduan has always known that he loves Li Fuyu. Just as he was equally aware that while he was in love, he was also deeply jealous of Li Fuyu. That time Li Fuyu not only healed him, but even after knowing Chengduan's purpose, she took him to find the ancient sacred tree without taking the trouble. It's a pity that after they arrived, the two discovered that the tree had been dead for thousands of years. In the end, although they didn't find the spiritual fruit, Li Fuyu still sent Chengduan safely out of the secret realm all the way. It was also on this journey that Chengduan realized that Li Fuyu, who is well known in the cultivation world, has a cold face and a warm heart, and is not as far away as the rumors say. The more Li Fuyu was like this, the more intense the strange fire in Chengduan's heart burned. Ming Xinzong's disciples are afraid of him and avoid him, and no one will be friends with him. Only Li Fuyu was different. When a person is far away from you, you will never be jealous of him. But when he breaks into your life suddenly, it will give you an illusion that you are within reach. Chengduan is like this. He felt that he seemed to be able to pick off the bright moon in the sky. The closer Li Fuyu was to him, the more jealous he became. The seeds of love and jealousy germinate together, intertwine and take root and grow up, inseparable. Li Fuyu, Li Fuyu. Chengduan's heart has never felt so painful. He fell slowly to the ground with a sickly smile on his face. He put his hand on his heart, feeling the trembling of his heart. The man knew that something must have happened to his avatar going to Tianmian Palace, but he has no time to take care of it now. Chengduan's hair was loose, and he was lying on the ground laughing and calling that name softly. So what? But I did get what I wanted. I gain power, and we are one. Li Fuyu. In the small building on Meiguang Mountain in Tian Shui Palace, Li Fenglan only gave the man in red a cold look, and the next moment he stabbed the dagger into Chengduan's flesh with a blank expression. At this moment, a drop of blood broke through the man's chest and slowly fell into Li Fenglan's palm. This is what he has in mind. The man in red was motionless for an instant, frozen here as if his spirit had been lost. Seeing that the thing he wanted was already in his hands, Li Fenglan slowly clenched his heart, and the next moment, the thing disappeared from his palm and returned to the owner's body. The originally broken spiritual roots showed signs of growth, and a red mark suddenly appeared on Li Fenglan's forehead. But only for a moment, the red mark disappeared again. The formation in the room continued to operate, and the red light won a big victory. A dazzling light flashed, the red vines disappeared little by little, and Chengduan, who had lost his support, slowly fell to the ground. Seeing this, Li Fenglan couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, and then couldn't help coughing lightly. He didn't have a liking for Chengduan, the person who avenged his kindness and stole his Taoist heart. The formation just now disturbed the true energy in the man in red. If an outsider were to come to see him, he was seriously injured and died because of the sudden retrograde qi in his body, and uncontrollable bleeding from his heart broke out of his body. The method of death has been planned. What Li Fenglan has to do now is to deal with the knife wound on his chest, and then throw the corpse in front of him to another place overnight, completely disregarding his relationship with this matter. After all, as long as they see this corpse, people should be able to see that the man in red in front of them is just a clone puppet, and where exactly his cultivation was stolen. At that time, the comprehension world will definitely be in chaos because of this incident, and Li Fenglan doesn't want to be involved. It's a pity that Li Fenglan accidentally forgot one thing when doing it, his current body is not generally bad. The formation just now consumed a lot of his mind, and Li Fenglan has not fully absorbed that drop of effort. So just when he was about to dispose of the corpse, Li Fenglan's forehead suddenly felt a stabbing pain. He took 2 steps back involuntarily, then fell heavily on the bed and fell unconscious. Ruined. Li Fenglan's last thought before she fell into a coma was, there is a corpse lying in the middle of my room, and the knife wound on the corpse has not been treated in time. With the fall of the clone, Cheng Duan, who was far away from the Ming Xinzong, finally stood up slowly. His face was pale, and the hand on his chest trembled violently, as if he had lost half his life just now. The fact is almost the same. After the death of the Avatar in Tianmian Palace, Cheng Duan's cultivation has dropped 2 small realms in an instant, and it is difficult to recover in a short time. Cheng Duan got up and walked to the stone bell, smashing it severely. Useless stuff. He coughed up 2 mouthfuls of blood foam, and then hurriedly swallowed the elixir to adjust the true energy in his body that gradually calmed down. After a quarter of an hour, Cheng Duan opened his eyes again. The man doesn't know what happened in Tianmian Palace, he only knows that if the corpse is found, the matter of secretly digging out Li Fu's heart will be exposed. Cheng Duan clenched his hands into fists. Not caring so much, he immediately took the risk of waking up a few puppets and maidservants who were taken to Tianmian Palace by his avatar, and ordered them to find the corpse as soon as possible and destroy the corpse directly. After doing all this, Cheng Duan staggered to the apse of the Shadow Palace. In this extremely empty apse, there was only a snow-colored fox fur hanging. The man tore off the fox fur from the hanger, and then hugged it into his arms tremblingly. After a long while, he slowly calmed down. This fox fur was given to him by Li Fu in the secret realm back then. For more than 1,000 years, the man has kept it well hidden behind the shadow hall. At this moment, Cheng Duan stroked his hand to his heart again. The pain has completely disappeared, and everything just now and the memory of that period of thousands of years ago suddenly seemed as far away as a dream. In the middle of the night, a few talisman papers in the ebony boat suddenly turned into human shapes, and the bells hanging around their waists twitched slightly. Those fairy maidservants paused for a few seconds, then followed the sound and headed towards a corner of Tianmian Palace. Not long after, these figures appeared halfway up Meiguang Mountain. However, before they continued to move forward, a flash of sword light flashed, and those fairy maidservants fell to the ground and turned back into talisman papers in an instant. In the next moment, those talisman papers burned to ashes, blown away by the night wind and disappeared. A black shadow appeared in the small building on Meiguang Mountain, and disappeared here together with the corpse on the ground not long after. Nothing happened in Tian Shui Palace that night. In the early morning of the next day, Li Fenglan was awakened by her own biological clock. Even though she slept in a very awkward position all night and her head still hurts, Li Fenglan immediately got up and looked at the open space in the center of the room after waking up. With just one glance, a row of red and bold exclamation marks instantly flashed across Li Fenglan's mind. He found that the corpse lying on the ground had disappeared. What's going on? Li Fenglan murmured to herself. From rebirth to now, Li Fenglan has never been so nervous. He was sure that the man in red last night was completely dead, and it was absolutely impossible for him to leave by himself. And if Cheng Duan's subordinates, or people from the Zongmen had already found this place, it was absolutely impossible for him to sleep peacefully through the night. So how did that corpse disappear? Or in other words, who took away the corpse without anyone noticing? Li Fenglan squatted down slowly, and stroked the floor with her fingertips. The formation from last night has completely disappeared, and there is no other strange spiritual power left in the space. If it weren't for the scar on his wrist that hasn't healed, Li Fenglan would really suspect that everything last night was just a dream. At this moment, Li Fenglan saw an extremely dazzling light suddenly flashing outside the window. He frowned, and finally stood up slowly. If Li Fenglan read correctly just now, the light seemed to appear in the direction of Nanling Mountain. The monks who came to Tianmian Palace to participate in the Zongmen conference this time all lived on different peaks of Nanling Mountain. Intuition told him that this light was definitely related to what happened last night. The man turned back to the bed, put on his veiled hat again and walked out quickly. When he went out, he saw sword energy rising towards the sky in the direction of Nanling Mountain of Tianmian Palace. It should be someone fighting there. Seeing the white light, many disciples of Tianmian Palace thought that something serious happened to the sect, so Yu Jian rushed over immediately. Normally, Li Fenglan would certainly not join in the fun if she could. But today he didn't hesitate at all, and directly summoned the spirit crane from Tianmian Palace to head towards Nanling Mountain. Ling He's speed is far inferior to Yu Jian. When Li Fenglan came to Nanling Mountain, the place was already a mess. There are a total of 30 peaks in Nanling Mountain, and they can be seen from a little closer. The place where the chaos happened today happened to be Xiao Peak where Chengdu lived. It is a distance away from other peaks of Nanling Mountain, but Li Fenglan knows that the farce this morning has definitely spread throughout the entire Nanling Mountain. The great masters of other sects did not intervene in Xiao Feng's affairs for the time being, it was to save face for Tianmian Palace. At this time, there was no one fighting in the main hall square of Xiaofeng Peak. The monks who had just arrived gathered together in small groups to discuss what happened not long ago. Even he who has stayed in Tianmian Palace all his life, has never seen such a scene. May I ask this fellow Taoist, did there be a fight just now at Xiaofeng? Just as she jumped off Ling He's back, Li Fenglan grabbed a random person and asked. The disciple himself didn't want to answer the question, but when he turned around and saw who was asking him, he changed his mind. He was also at the White Jade Lotus platform that day, and saw with his own eyes how Li Fenglan vented her anger for Tianmian Palace. The disciples of Ming Zenzong discovered just now that their Cheng Xianjun is dead. From the tone of his voice, the disciple was quite happy, and it really wasn't a big deal to watch the excitement. Even though she had been prepared for a long time, after hearing this sentence, Li Fenglan repeated it, Cheng Duan is dead. That's right, the disciple obviously had been listening to the gossip here for a while, and now he couldn't wait to share. He was just discovered and died in the residence we arranged for him, so people from Ming Zenzong came over make trouble, say you want to ask for an explanation. Died in the residence arranged for him by the section. How did you die? Thinking of the knife wound on Chengduan's body, Li Fenglan hurriedly asked. This. I don't seem to have heard of it. The man scratched his head and said. The knife wound on Chengduan's chest was very obvious, if he didn't deal with it, he would be able to see it at a glance. And the people of Ming Zenzong will definitely use this to make a big composition. Hearing these words, Li Fenglan was able to confirm that the person who took Chengduan away from his room last night even treated the knife wound on the corpse. He really wanted to help him. But even so, Li Fenglan still doesn't like the feeling that she is in the dark while others are in the dark. Who is that person who helped him? And what does he have to do with his own resurrection? Before Li Fenglan could think, a dark red sword light appeared on the main peak again. It's the deputy suzerain of Ming Guangzong. After seeing who was coming, the disciple hurriedly introduced to Li Fenglan. This sect meeting was brought by Cheng Duan and the deputy suzerain of Ming Zenzong, and the two lived on different peaks. And those who made trouble just now are just a few core disciples of Ming Zenzong. They have been following Cheng Duan all the time, and these people also found the man's body. So the Jian Guang just now wasn't him. Li Fenglan couldn't help but said. After hearing his words, the cultivator of Tianmian Palace who stood aside snorted coldly and said, yes, they are just a few disciples. They really don't take our Tianmian Palace seriously. As soon as the voice fell, a dark red épée fell from the air and directly penetrated the ground. There was an instant silence. The deputy suzerain of Ming Zenzong stood beside the épée. The red robe on his body danced with the sword energy. He glanced around the people around, gritted his teeth and said, our Cheng Xianjun lost his life in Tianmian Palace inexplicably. Now not only is it hard to find an explanation, but even his body can't be taken away." As soon as the deputy suzerain finished speaking, all the Ming Xinzong disciples in the square echoed loudly. Li Fenglan heard that during the period, a disciple from Tianmian Palace kindly explained that Cheng Xianjun died strangely, and after the investigation, he will definitely be sent back to Ming Xinzong. But the deputy suzerain obviously disagreed with what he said. The red ape flew up, slashing fiercely at the disciples of Tianmian Palace in front, and there was a burst of screams in the square. From the looks of it, the deputy suzerain of Ming Xinzong was planning to rush in and the corpse. At this moment, a silver-white longsword suddenly flew out from nowhere, easily blocking the red ape in the air. The deputy suzerain of Ming Xinzong's face turned ugly. At this moment, the anemone flower transformed from spiritual energy bloomed in the void, and a man in black stepped on the anemone and appeared in front of everyone. The man's long hair fluttered in the air, and the ZZ embroidered on the robe stared angrily at everyone in the square as if alive. His gaze was extremely cold, and the moment the man appeared, everyone in the square fell silent. Behind him are dozens of Law Hall disciples who are also dressed in black. Li Fenglan saw that the cultivator standing beside her switched to worship mode instantly, as if it wasn't him who was standing here cursing people last moment. As for Li Fenglan, seeing the appearance of this traitor, he couldn't help but think of a word: pretense. Meng Linzhou raised his hand slightly, and the silver-white longsword flew back into his hand immediately. The man didn't even look at the deputy suzerain of Ming Xinzong, and went straight to the main hall where Cheng Duan lived. Seeing that he was ignored by Meng Linzhou, the deputy suzerain of Tianmian Palace immediately gritted his teeth and raised his sword to block Meng Linzhou. "Meng Xianzun, isn't your faction going to explain what happened today?" Meng Linzhou finally stopped. And under the attention of all the people, he lived up to Li Fenglan's expectations and took a look at Ming Xinzong, then suddenly frowned and asked, "What happened today?" "Ha ha 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 ha, Meng Linzhou really has you." Li Fenglan finally found out that after Meng Linzhou became the law holder immortal Venerable, the tortured people expanded from his master to the whole realm of cultivation. It was really refreshing to see the people of Ming Xinzong being choked back by Meng Linzhou. He believed that his apprentice absolutely did not deliberately satirize people's minds. Meng Linzhou said that he would say this, 9 out of 10 because he went somewhere to be passive and sabotage his work before, and he still doesn't know what happened on Zhixiao Feng. As expected of him. "Meng Xianzun, are you mocking me on purpose?" Sure enough, the deputy suzerain of Ming Xinzong became more and more angry. "No." Seeing that the deputy lord of Ming Xinzong didn't answer his question, Meng Linzhou didn't say much, and directly sent someone in for an autopsy. As for himself, seeing that the people from Ming Xinzong had the intention of breaking in, Meng Linzhou blocked the door like a of evil. For a while, everyone was deadlocked. The area of Tianmian Palace is as big as 3 counties in the world. There are more than 1,000 fairy mountains with names and surnames alone, and there are countless monks in the sect. From the establishment of the foundation, the monks will complete the mission of the sect, and most of them will go to the mortal world to practice. And a small number of monks will also choose to stay in Tianmian Palace, and assist in handling sect affairs in the Law Hall or several other disciple halls. Although the disciples who chose to go to the Law Hall accounted for only a small part of the monks in the sleeping palace, at this time Li Fenglan still saw that the entire Xiaofeng Square had been surrounded by men in black. These Law Hall disciples were uniformly dressed, expressionless, and looked very imposing. The one who died last night was not Cheng Duan's real body after all. Li Fenglan believed that the disciples of the Law Hall would definitely find something strange after they entered. The deputy suzerain of Ming Xinzong is Cheng Duan's confidant, so he definitely knows the identity of the person inside. Sure enough, not long after the disciples of the Law Hall entered, the members of the Mingzhen sect at the door looked at each other, and suddenly drew their swords and stabbed Meng Linzhou together. "Ah!" The monk standing beside Li Feng couldn't help exclaiming in a low voice, why are so many people beating up Xianzun Meng? Seeing the appearance of that group of people, Li Fenglan smiled and said, they can't beat Meng Linzhou. After all, Meng Linzhou was taught by himself back then. What? Fellow deist, how can you directly call Meng Xianzun by his name? He before the monk beside Li Fenglan finished speaking, he saw Meng Linzhou who was not far away directly using sword energy to force everyone around him back. The man glanced at the disciples of Mingzhen sect, and said with a business-like face, it's the time of the Zongmen conference, for the sake of justice, I will invite all the Zongmen who came to Tianmian Palace to deal with this matter together. Little did he know that Ming Xinzong was afraid of this. Stop talking nonsense. This is our Ming Xin sect's business, we can handle it ourselves. Hearing Meng Linzhou's words, the leading monks of Ming Xin sect gritted their teeth and prepared to force their way into the main hall again. But at this moment, the disciples of the law hall who had just entered the room walked out quickly. All the black-clothed monks guarding the square raised their long swords and looked nervously at the Mingzhen sect. There were hundreds of monks standing on the Xiaofeng square, and all of them stayed in place quietly, watching the black-clothed disciples salute Meng Linzhou. Master Xianzun, that one in the room is not the corpse of sect Master Cheng. The leading disciple of the law hall hesitated for a while, and finally gritted his teeth and said this sentence. Hearing this, many people in the square gasped. What nonsense are you talking about? Ming Xinzong's deputy suzerain stared wide-eyed, but before he finished speaking, Meng Linzhou said coldly to the disciple of the law hall, go on, leave him alone. Yes, Master Xianzun, he took a deep breath and continued, that's just a clone puppet, the cause of death is that the true energy was retrograde, and he died of a heart. We found 2 different auras on him. When this disciple spoke, his voice kept trembling. He knew what his words meant. All the people present are monks, and everyone should understand everything at this point. And those who don't understand, can't help but ask the people around them. What does it mean to have 2 strands of spiritual energy in your body? Li Fenglan stared at the front quietly, and replied in a flat tone, it means that there can only be 1 spiritual energy in the human body. If there are 2 strands, then one must belong to someone else. If you want other people's spiritual energy to circulate in your body for a long time, there's only one way to do it. What method? The monk beside Li Fenglan asked nervously. Steal someone else's heart. What? The monk beside Li Fenglan was startled first, and then subconsciously asked, Cheng Duan is an immortal in the tribulation period, who can have such a great ability? At the same time, Meng Linzhou, dressed in black, finally turned around and asked the same question. Whose Dao heart did Cheng Duan steal? The disciple of the law hall did not dare to speak, he lowered his head and glanced at the person standing behind him. Another woman in black came forward and raised a glazed lamp with both hands. Li Fenglan recognized it. This glazed lantern is one of the fairy artifacts of Tianmian Palace, it will not be borne easily. Even from far away, Li Fenglan could see that her hands were trembling uncontrollably. This lamp collected the spiritual power collected from the corpse of Cheng Duan's clone, as well as the blood in his heart. With these 2 things, as long as you hold a glazed lamp, separate your soul and go in to investigate, you can find out the owner of the spiritual power. Meng Linzhou glanced at these disciples suspiciously, as if wondering why they didn't say the name directly. Just when he was about to reach out to take the glazed lamp, the Ming Xinzong couldn't help but draw out his sword again. The disciples of the law hall next to Meng Linzhou also fought with them. Seeing this situation, the female disciple of the law hall who was holding a glass lamp in her hand finally spoke out loudly about the master of the Taoist heart at this moment. Yes, it was Li back then, Li. Li Fuyu. After saying these words, her breathing rhythm became rapid. Then the person who was stunned here was finally replaced by Meng Linzhou. At the same time, the people in the entire square seemed to have been immobilized, and they stood still and forgot to move or speak. Li Fuyu. Li Fenglan couldn't help sighing softly, he hadn't heard this name called out for many years. My master. After being silent for an unknown period of time, Meng Linzhou actually said the word master in front of hundreds of people. He shook his head slightly, and took a few steps back involuntarily. Meng Linzhou muttered to himself, Master, Cheng Duan did find Master's body back then. He actually did such a thing. Men's hearts have never been so chaotic as they are now. He has always known that Li Fuyu did something wrong back then, and was besieged and killed by the comprehension world, he deserved it. But, how dare Cheng Duan destroy Master's body? He is even more unworthy to use Li Fuyu's spiritual power to dominate. Meng Linzhou slowly clenched the hilt of his sword. Hearing the three words Li Fuyu, the vice suzerain of Ming Xinzong became visibly panicked. He took a deep breath and said loudly, Bloody spout! How dare you Tianmian Palace still have the face to mention Li Fuyu? Wasn't he the one who turned the three realms upside down? 1,000 years have passed, and everyone forgot about it, right? The ordinary disciples of Mingzhen sect obviously didn't know the truth, and when they heard the deputy suzerain say so, they naturally scolded Tianmian Palace too. There are even many people who have already clashed with the disciples of the Law Hall. At this moment, Meng Linzhou seemed to have returned to the impulsive young man back then, who was fearless, and had his master for everything. Regardless of the identity of the person in front of him, he also forgot his own identity, and directly raised his sword and stabbed at the heart of the deputy suzerain of Ming Xinzong. Meng Linzhou, if you are unkind, don't blame me for being unrighteous. The man opposite said this through gritted teeth, and the next moment his eyes turned red and his body shone with light. In just a few seconds, the peak of this mountain was actually thundered. The monks in the square didn't understand what happened, and even Meng Linzhou couldn't help frowning. Li Fenglan was the only one who suddenly became nervous after seeing the sky. This is no ordinary thunderbolt. The man slowly closed his eyes, and after a little mental struggle, his voice suddenly came from the extremely quiet square. He yelled loudly, Meng Linzhou, run! He's going to explode his Yuan Dan. Li Fenglan could see that the deputy suzerain of Mingzhen sect in front of him should be just a puppet like Cheng Duan before him. Most of his body is still in Ming Xinzong, and he is controlled by Cheng Duan, that's why the man works so hard. Since he is just a clone puppet, he is naturally not afraid of death. Ming Xinzong is also a decent family at any rate, they will not admit this. What this man wants to do right now is to blow up his Yuan Dan, use this power to destroy Cheng Duan's body, and make the whole thing unprovable. What? Meng Linzhou couldn't help frowning and looked at where Li Fenglan was. He just saw the man in the white short-veiled hat at a glance, and then remembered how he made up a random name in front of Li Fenglan and made friends with him. Why did Li Fenglan come to join in the fun? He recognized me? Embarrassing, really embarrassing. Meng Linzhou has been pretending very well in front of the disciples of the sect all these years. In the eyes of others, he is a serious, and upright immortal of the Law Hall. Never thought that after meeting Li Fenglan, Meng Linzhou would overturn so quickly. Look at the back. Li Fenglan yelled loudly. He saw that Meng Linzhou's movements suddenly stopped after he found the person who reminded him. And the deputy lord of Ming Xinzong seized this opportunity and almost eliminated Meng Linzhou with a sword. Li Fenglan's reminder just now was both angry and serious, and Meng Linzhou actually heard a bit of a master's feeling from it. He gritted his teeth and threw that feeling out of his mind. Not only Meng Linzhou heard Li Fenglan's words, but other people in the square also heard them clearly. Although most people don't know Li Fenglan, but after hearing his words and seeing the Jiayun in the sky, people still choose to believe it. Yuan Dan's self-explosion is not a joke. In just a few seconds, the monks who had been standing on the square left with their swords. And the deputy suzerain of Ming Xinzong seemed not only to use the power of self-exploding Yuan Dan to destroy the corpses in the room, but also wanted to pull Meng Linzhou to die together. Anyway, as soon as Cheng Duan's incident happened, the relationship between Tianmian Palace and Ming Xinzong was destined to break down. It would be beneficial and harmless for Ming Xinzong to die another immortal in Tianmian Palace. Hearing Li Fenglin's words, he swung his sword at Meng Linzhou even more recklessly. At this time, Ji Lei's voice was already very loud, and almost all the people on Zhixiao Peak dispersed. Li Fenglin had already called Ling He, but when she turned around and saw the rebel still standing outside the hall, he still couldn't help calling Meng Linzhou again. In fact, Meng Linzhou was not in love with fighting, he just wanted to get the corpse out of the palace before the man in front of him, Yuan Dan, blew himself up. Li Fenglin's voice finally awakened Meng Linzhou. He used his sword energy to push back the man facing him, and then quickly flew towards the edge of Xiaofeng Mountain, dragged Li Fenglin onto the long sword and left here. Not long after the two of them left Zhixiaofeng, thunderstorms fell like raindrops. As the deputy suzerain of Ming Xinzong blew up the Yuan Dan, the entire building of the main hall also collapsed. At the same time, Li Fenglin and Meng Linzhou landed on the mountain opposite Zhixiao Peak. Seeing the pile of ruins not far away, Li Fenglin and Meng Linzhou fell silent. Li Fenglin himself didn't feel much about this, he was more relieved. Seeing that Meng Linzhou remained silent for a while, Li Fenglin finally couldn't help but look at the people around her. He thought that Meng Linzhou didn't speak because his vest was too clean, and he was a little embarrassed for a while. Unexpectedly, as soon as Li Fenglin turned around, she saw Meng Linzhou, the immortal of the law hall dressed in black, gently wiping away a tear with the back of her hand. This traitor actually cried? Meng Linzhou, Linzhou. This name was given by Li Fenglin for him, and it refers to his residence in Suihu Miazhu in his previous life. Li Fenglin and the person in front of her have lived in the snowy Miazhu for hundreds of years. And in these 100 years, Meng Linzhou did not give him less trouble, and Li Fenglin did not less punish this traitor. No matter how Li Fenglin punishes him, Meng Linzhou will always be stubborn. Today is the master. Li Fenglin saw Meng Linzhou shed tears for the first time. Noticing Li Fenglin's gaze, Meng Linzhou sighed softly, turned around and said to his only friend in the sect in front of him, "I just, suddenly feel a little unworthy of my master." "Thank you." Meng Linzhou stepped forward and hugged Li Fenglin gently, then smiled and said in a low voice, "When you called me just now, I reminded me of him. Remember Li Fuyu?" Hearing the traitor's words, Li Fenglin suddenly felt a sense of crisis. Meng Linzhou has never seen his face before. And when the heart and soul are completely fused, his current face will probably be more than 4 or 5 points similar to himself in the previous life. Meng Linzhou has been with him for as long as he can remember, can he not recognize this face? Li Fenglin, dangerous. Although she felt a little nervous in her heart, Li Fenglin's tone didn't change much. He was a little anxious when he called Meng Linzhou just now, but he didn't expect this to remind him of Li Fuyu. The image of himself in the heart of the traitor is indeed not very good. "It seems that your master has a bad temper. It's not all because of you." "No." Meng Linzhou suddenly lowered his head and whispered, "I was too much back then." When Meng Linzhou was accepted as a disciple, Li Fuyu was already the #1 person in the cultivation world, and soon he was designated as the next master of Tianmian Palace, the immortal Venerable. At that time, Meng Linzhou didn't understand what this meant, but when he himself became the law-holding immortal and understood a little bit. Li Fuyu had long been wiped out. There was only one snow-covered Miazhu left, but Meng Linzhou burned it clean with his own hands. Thinking of this, Meng Linzhou's heart suddenly throbbed. He didn't understand what it felt like, but he felt that the chaos in his heart suddenly broke open. The emotions that have been suppressed for thousands of years are gradually emerging from there. Li Fenglin was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect that today he not only saw the traitor cry for the first time, but even heard him admit his mistake for the first time. Is this still Meng Linzhou? Meng Linzhou lowered his head slowly, gritted his teeth and said, "I want to kill Cheng Duan with my own hands, and take back Master's Dao heart." His long black hair was hanging down from his temples, and his eyes were extremely deep at this moment. After saying this, Meng Linzhou fell silent. He didn't see that the man standing beside him coldly turned his gaze elsewhere. False compassion. He will not be fooled by this rebel's rhetoric. Meng Linzhou pretends to be an obedient apprentice, as if you were not the one who burned the plum tree as a teacher. Even though she scolded the traitor 10,000 times in her heart, Li Fenglan turned her head and pretended to be calm, nodding and smiling, and said, "You are really filial. The master will be resurrected by you." Li Fenglan gave false compliments to the traitor here, but Meng Linzhou had the audacity to accept it. Just when the anger in Li Fenglan's heart soared, the traitor finally Yujian went to Xiaofeng to deal with the matter, and left his sight. Li Fenglan took 2 deep breaths, calmed down and planned to call out Linghe and go back to Meiguang Mountain to rest. But at this moment, the danger suddenly occurred. It turned out that many Mingzenzong disciples also escaped from Xiaofeng in the chaos. A Mingzenzong monk hiding on other uninhabited mountains was discovered by disciples of the Law Hall. In a panic, he ran to Li Fenglan. Seeing Li Fenglan from a distance, that person thought that Li Fenglan was also here to arrest him. Without waiting for Li Fenglan's reaction, he acted first. This person drew his sword at Li Fenglan without even thinking about it. But this monk is obviously a bit stupid. He forgot his territory in Tianmian Palace, and he also forgot what day it was recently. Just when Li Fenglan was about to block it with the spirit treasure given by the original master, a burst of music suddenly sounded not far away. In the next second, the monk screamed and fell to the ground, while Li Fenglan's gaze fell involuntarily to the direction where the voice came from. "How is it him? I saw the man holding a pipa in his arms and his long hair hanging loose." The soft sunlight in the blue sky cast carelessly on the man's face, making his already extremely clear and elegant facial features even more gentle. In Li Fenglan's memory, he originally had a pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes, and he looked affectionate to everyone. It's just, now there is only a coldness in these eyes. Ning Qingmo. Li Fenglan thought that the Zongmen conference was really a good place to meet old friends again. After all, I met an acquaintance here again. It's just that Li Fenglan remembered that Ning Qingmo's last life had nothing to do with the words willing to help others. What happened in the past 1,000 years to make a selfish person like Ning Qingmo change his sex? Seeing that Ning Qingmo was not far away, Li Fenglan hurriedly stood where she was, and saluted him together with the disciples of the Law Hall who had rushed here just now. The man who was walking towards here did not speak. Ning Qingmo just glanced at them lightly, without the slightest emotion in his eyes. Li Fenglan couldn't help frowning. How did Ning Qingmo become like this after not seeing her for 1,000 years? Back then, he was completely different from what he is now. Li Fuyu met Ning Qingmo when she was tracking Moxiu. That day happened to be the moon worship festival in the world, and the Jingyu Lake in the city was full of river lanterns. From a distance, it seems that the stars have fallen into the mortal world and floated on the lake. But Li Fuyu didn't take the time to enjoy the beautiful scenery in front of her. He chased a demon cultivator through 4 cities, but he didn't expect to lose him here. Li Fuyu's eyes swept over the people by the lake, and finally landed on the center of the lake not far away. He saw among the river lanterns, a mysterious wooden painting boat swaying slightly with the lake water, and there was a faint sound of a piano. Several people on the boat were sitting there drinking wine and admiring the moon, looking very comfortable. Most importantly, those are several monks. After hesitating for a few seconds, Li Fuyu still decided to go forward and ask. He found the people on the boat, and the people on the boat naturally saw him. What Ning Qingmo saw that day was such a scene. There are lotus lanterns swaying on the lake, and the blue waves under the lanterns are rippling in circles, looking as bright as clouds from a distance, even so colorful that it is a bit vulgar. Until a boy shows up. Li Fuyu, dressed in red and white, just stepped on the lotus lanterns all over the lake and came towards the boat. His toes lightly touched the river lantern, which only made the river lantern shake slightly as if blown by the night wind. Accompanied by the sword in the snowy Miazhu all the year round, Li Fuiu's temperament became extraordinarily cold. But the night was too gentle that day, so gentle that it almost melted the coldest snow in Miazhu. Ning Qingmo had never seen such a beauty before, and his hands fell from the strings involuntarily. The sound of the piano stopped, and all the drinkers put down their glasses. Fellow deists, Li Fuiu Xiankong stood in front of the painting boat. He saluted very politely, and then asked, "Have you seen any suspicious people appear?" Before the others could speak, they saw that Yingxiu put down his pipa, then got up and smiled at Li Fuiu and said, "Of course I saw you. Where did he go?" Li Fuiu became nervous all of a sudden. "You go on the boat first, and I'll talk to you later." Ning Qingmo smiled. Seeing this, Li Fuiu didn't think too much. He nodded and stood on the boat the next moment. "Friend deist." He was about to repeat this sentence when he saw Ning Qingmo put down his pipa and poured a glass of wine over to him. "Today is the moon worship festival, fellow Taoist, can you show me some face?" Li Fuiu looked at the people around her in some confusion, but she didn't expect that instead of helping her out of the siege, they even toasted her in the air. What to do, whether to drink wine or not? Li Fuiu became tangled up in her heart. Ning Qingmo also saw Li Fuiu's embarrassment, but to him, such a young man is more interesting. After getting close, Ning Qingmo carefully observed the young man's appearance. What surprised him was that not only could he not see any flaws, but he could even feel the delicacy of the other's facial features. The boy's skin was as white as ivory, his nose was slender and straight, and his lips were light red. There was a red mark on his forehead, and his black hair was like a waterfall. He could only be described as excessive face and greasy, but he had an extremely cold temperament. Ning Qingmo has never met such a person. Li Fuiu really wanted to refuse directly, but Ning Qingmo had already handed the wine glass to his eyes. There was no other way. The boy gritted his teeth lightly, and still took the wine glass from the opponent's hand. After counting down 3-2-1 in her heart, Li Fuiu finally closed her eyes and poured all the wine in the glass into her stomach. He had seen master drinking, so the taste of the wine should not be bad, right? However, the reality is completely different from Li Fuiu's imagination. As soon as he drank that glass of wine, a burning sensation spread from his throat to his stomach. The boy's face turned red instantly, and then he couldn't help coughing. It turns out that this is what wine tastes like. Seeing his appearance, Ning Qingmo, who wanted to tease him just now, finally felt that he was going too far. The man came up and patted him on the back, and said in a rare serious way, "Sorry, I didn't know you couldn't drink." "Ahem, it's okay." Li Fuiu thought that she was hundreds of years old anyway, and it would be a bit embarrassing for others to know that he had never drunk. "My name is Ning Qingmo," the man finally put down his wine glass, and asked, "I don't know how to call you." Even though he was choked by the wine, Li Fuiu, who was a nascent soul cultivator, quickly adjusted himself. "In Xiashan Sleeping Palace, Li Fuiu." "Li Fuiu." Ning Qingmo repeated his name, and smiled the next moment, "I've heard of you." Conceived at the age of 300, a genius among geniuses, he is the only one in the entire cultivation world. Hearing that it was Li Fuiu who came, the other people on the boat were also startled, and couldn't help but look at him differently. After the monks of Tian Shui Palace built the foundation, they would go down the mountain to practice after a while. But Li Fuiu's master kept him by his side until Li Yingying was released. So before this, Li Fuiu had never faced such a scene, the smell of wine and powder. All these things were strange to him. The scene on the painting boat made Li Fuiu feel very uncomfortable. The hand hidden in the wide cuff clenched the hem of his clothes uneasily. He was a little bit missing Suiyu Miazhu and his master. After being silent for a while, Li Fuiu finally remembered her business on the boat. "Fellow deist Ning Qingmo, where did the suspicious person you mentioned just now go?" Li Fuiu asked. "Hey? Suspicious person?" Ning Qingmo finally remembered this matter, he smiled and winked at Li Fuyu and said, "That person just now, he was on the boat." "What?" Li Fuyu became tense for a moment. She even put her hands on the spirit sword, and the long sword hummed very cooperatively. "I saw," Ning Qingmo said with a smile, "the suspicious person you met just now, isn't it you, the little Taoist?" From the first day they met, Li Fuyu knew that Ning Qingmo was not a serious person. So what happened to Ning Qingmo today? Seeing the strange look of the person in front of her, even Li Fenglan, who was determined to break away from her previous life, couldn't help being curious. The man came here, and through the remaining spiritual power on the strings, Li Fenglan quickly discovered one thing: Ning Qingmo's exercises are completely different from back then. The Xianqing sect where Ning Qingmo is located is the second largest sect in the cultivation world. Unlike Tianmian Palace, which is full of sword cultivators, the disciples of Xianqing sect have all kinds of cultivators. The core of Suankingmen Kung Fu is the heart method. They don't advocate penance, and they don't take maintaining the peace of the three realms as their mission like the people in Tianmian Palace. Suankingmen like to have fun, and even have a bit of sensuality. Li Fenglan remembered that in her previous life, before her death, Ning Qingmo was already the most favored disciple among the younger generation of Xianqing sect. Changing to a different mental method means that the man has left Suankingmen. So why on earth would he recultivate a Taoist method that is completely opposite to the Suankingmen's technique, and then give up his position as the future sect master? Ning Qingmo did a lot of good things for the position of sect master back then, such as using his friend. Thinking of this, Li Fenglan felt a little irritable. Because after reminiscing, he discovered that the plot about Ning Qingmo and Taoist in heaven seems to have stopped 1,200 years ago. He thought that after that, Ning Qingmo became the sect master step by step and got everything he wanted. However, Li Fenglan did not expect that all this would develop in a direction that she had never thought of. What happened to Ning Qingmo was so weird that Li Fenglan finally couldn't help trying to use his consciousness to investigate the other party. After a few seconds, he suddenly opened his eyes wide. Ning Qingmo not only gave up Suankingmen's cultivation method, but he also switched to Wuqing Dao. Why on earth is he doing this? Yingxiu Ning Qingmo, the name of Fengliu is famous in the whole cultivation world. Such a person turning to the ruthless Dao is more shocking than his own resurrection, isn't it? Li Fenglan's spiritual roots were completely abolished, and her spiritual consciousness also weakened a lot. Since it was the first time to do such a thing after being reborn, Li Fenglan, who was used to being an immortal venerable, accidentally overlooked this point. He didn't notice that the moment he withdrew his consciousness, Ning Qingmo's gaze suddenly turned around. A little cultivator who has not established a foundation for a long time and has lost all spiritual roots, dare to use his divine sense to probe the immortal venerable openly? Li Fenglan's rude behavior immediately caught Ning Qingmo's attention. The man couldn't help raising his head, and slowly walked towards Li Fenglan's direction. When Li Fenglan came back to her senses, Ning Qingmo was already standing opposite him. It's obvious, just now, he used his consciousness to investigate the other party's behavior, and he has already been discovered. Things get a little awkward. Li Fenglan's cultivation base was too low, his behavior did not threaten Ning Qingmo at all, but he almost wrote the words disrespectful and provocative on his face. Ning Qingmo looked at Li Fenglan coldly. Being stared at by him like this, Li Fenglan couldn't help but hesitate a bit. Why don't you call the traitor back to rescue? No, 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 what's the face of being a teacher? Seeing that Ning Qingmo had been silent, not only Li Fenglan, but also the other disciples of the Law Hall standing beside him trembled. They didn't know that Li Fenglan used his spiritual sense to probe Ning Qingmo just now, so they didn't understand why the immortal came here, and they felt that Ning Qingmo was more and more terrifying. Take off the hood. After a pause, Ning Qingmo finally spoke. Valence. Li Fenglan couldn't help taking a step back and said, Master Xianzun, I was injured in the early years, and there is a scar on my face. Before she finished speaking, Li Fenglan stopped. Obviously, he couldn't say to an immortal, "I'm afraid I will scare you." Li Fenglan is a swordsman. In order to facilitate activities, the veiled hat he wears can only cover his chin. Before Li Fenglan lifted the veil by herself, suddenly a gust of mountain wind blew and gently lifted a corner of the veil. The next moment, Ning Qingmo, who was standing opposite him, saw the hideous scar on Li Fenglan's chin. The man couldn't help but frowned. Feeling the white gauze gently brushing against her skin, Li Fenglan hurriedly lowered her head. But then he suddenly discovered that what happened just now seemed to be more than just a gust of wind. The land under his feet was trembling slightly at this moment, and the dust and sand on the ground were swiftly sweeping back. Even the stone cliff not far away has cracked a gap. What's going on here? Did Tianmian Palace say there was an earthquake? Before Li Fenglan could figure it out, he heard a disciple of the law hall standing next to him scream. What's going on there? Looking in the direction he pointed, he saw a towering black mountain in the distance, actually breaking apart little by little. It seems that something is trying to rush out of the mountain. At this moment, a long chant suddenly appeared in everyone's ears. The sound was so loud that it could shake mountains and rivers, and it was accompanied by the ear-piercing sound of iron chains rubbing against each other. After the loud noise, the world was silent. Li Fenglan saw that the disciples of the law hall standing here couldn't help approaching Ning Qingmo. And when everyone froze in place with terrified faces, no one saw Li Fenglan suddenly smiled under the hood. It turned out to be you, Cheng Huang. The black mountain in the distance is called Shao Yuan Mountain, and at the foot of Shao Yuan Mountain, there is locked the only fierce beast in the three realms that was born according to the way of heaven. Ning Qingmo walked forward quickly, and said, "Stay here and don't move." He stepped into the void and headed towards Shao Yuan Mountain. After he left, the rest finally couldn't help whispering. You know, Cheng Huang, who was suppressed at the foot of Shao Yuan Mountain, was originally taken by Li Fuyu to bring disaster to the world. Just as he was speaking, he pointed carefully in the direction of the snowy Miazhu in the distance. To harm the world? Hearing these words, Li Fenglan couldn't help raising her eyebrows. Another young disciple who had just established the foundation couldn't help exclaiming, "Then why didn't you kill it? Ancient fierce beasts, how can you kill them if you want to?" "I tried it thousands of years ago," the person who spoke first added. "It's a pity that the combined forces of the entire cultivation world couldn't kill it, but barely locked it in the forbidden area and sealed it." After the voice fell, everyone became silent, and no one dared to talk about deeper matters. Feeling the vibration on the soles of their feet, everyone almost guessed what happened on Shao Yuan Mountain. The barrier that seals Cheng Huang will have to be repaired every 100 years, and it is just around the corner recently, when the barrier is at its weakest. The Tian Li summoned by the deputy suzerain of Mingzenzong slashed like this, the barrier was completely shattered, and the beast tried to break free from the chain. "Yes, what if it escapes?" the young disciple asked with a trembling voice. The person who answered his question this time was Li Fenglan. "If Cheng Huang really escaped, we people wouldn't be enough to put the monster's teeth in place." After finishing speaking, he smiled, his tone was very relaxed. Hearing Li Fenglan's words, the person who asked the question fell to his knees on the ground with a plop, and the faces of several monks around him also turned pale. When everyone stood still and did not dare to move, an older disciple of the law hall quickly stepped forward and pulled the person kneeling on the ground up and said, "Useless things, Cheng Huang feeds on the aura of heaven and earth. Eat something." "Who is it?" After speaking, he gave Li Fenglan a stare, as if to warn him not to continue spreading rumors. Covered by the hood, Li Fenglan pretended nothing happened and shifted her eyes to the side to see the scenery. "Just kidding, don't mind it. You can't just allow you to spread rumors about me, but don't let me spread rumors back." The disciple of Law Hall wanted to warn Li Fenglan, but he didn't expect that he would see a large auspicious cloud appearing in the sky the next moment. Then a sword shadow pierced the sky and brought a beam of golden light, covering the entire Shaoyuan mountain. In an instant, there was bursts of fairy music, and the clouds were transpiring. Even if Li Fenglan and the others stood far away, they could feel the surging spiritual power in the air. All the great powers who came to participate in the Zongmen conference gathered in Shaoyuan mountain to jointly suppress the vicious beast. Accompanied by the long chants of the ferocious beast, the young monks who were standing on the same cliff with Li Fenglan all stared in place. That is the immortal master Meng Linzhou. There is also the immortal master Ning Qingmo who left just now. After a while of silence, finally someone with good eyesight recognized a few of them. Even if they are also monks, they have never witnessed such a force enough to shake the world. At this moment, Li Fenglan suddenly heard a familiar name from the people around her. By the way, where is the sword-wielding immortal? If he comes, will he be able to seal Cheng Huang? Lin Chaochen? Hearing this sentence, Li Fenglan couldn't help complaining in her heart, your sword-wielding immortal Lin Chaochen is probably still busy getting rid of his inner demons. Then someone shook his head and replied, it is said that Lin Xianzun was injured when he was chasing the Yaezu a few days ago. Unexpectedly, the Yaezu had a change before the injury was healed. He had already left the sect earlier and rushed to deal with this matter overnight. Gone. Why does Lin Chaochen blame the demon clan? That day he obviously caused trouble after giving birth to a demon, and was injured when he was hunted down. I'm afraid it's fake to deal with the Yaezu, and it's true to take the opportunity to avoid the limelight. The Zongmen conference is not over yet. If Lin Chaochen doesn't come out and show his face, it will definitely arouse others' suspicion. Going out to deal with the changes of the monster clan is really a good reason to avoid the powers of all parties in the cultivation world. I didn't expect Lin Chaochen to be so good at making up stories after 1,000 years of absence. Tisk tisk. Li Fenglan thought, if she had been as smart as Lin Chaochen back then, she probably would have lived a few more years. Sure enough, after hearing the explanation, the people around felt that Master Xianzun always puts the overall situation first, and no one doubted the truth of this matter. At the same time, the golden light is flourishing on the Shaoyuan mountain, and the 7 great abilities of the fusion period and the tribulation period each show their magical powers and seal Cheng Huang. And the ancient fierce beast kept hitting the stone wall, making piercing long chants. Seeing the scene in front of her, Li Fenglan slowly closed her eyes. More than 1,000 years ago, Cheng Huang was sealed in front of his face by everyone in the cultivation world in the same way. It's useless. Looking at the picture in front of him, he suddenly smiled and said these 3 words. With these 7 people, there is absolutely no way to seal an ancient divine beast. Sure enough, the next moment, with a roar, the black Shaoyuan mountain actually shattered little by little. The Wunfu Thai boulder was turned into powder in an instant, and a huge ice blue eye looked out through the cracked gap in the stone wall. Yes, one eye blocked the crack in the stone wall. It is rumored that Cheng Huang has a pure white body, a fox-like figure, horns growing on his back, and a mountain-like body. Now it seems that it is not an exaggeration at all. The people staying on the mountain wall all took a step back, and invariably remembered the record about Cheng Huang in the ancient books. A few seconds later, the huge Shaoyuan mountain slowly shattered and fell down. And the monk who tried to seal Cheng Huang just now was also pushed away by this powerful force. The smoke rose rapidly, covering the sky and the sun. At this time, they finally saw Cheng Huang's appearance clearly, and it was exactly as it was said in the book. Its figure is indeed as big as half of the Shaoyuan mountain that fell down just now. Standing in the void, Cheng Huang's icy blue eyes suddenly fell on the mountain wall where Li Fenglan and his party were standing, and then let out a long moan. Because of this long chant, the stone wall under everyone's feet trembled again, and some people even couldn't hold on and sat down on the ground. The distance of a few miles is really nothing to a huge beast like Cheng Huang. Almost instantly, Cheng Huang appeared on the edge of the cliff where Li Fenglan was. Qinzhuang's volume is too large, it blocks everyone's sight. These monks have never been so desperate. Fierce, the beast is eating people. Looking blankly at the mountain-like body, someone couldn't help shouting this sentence. But the huge beast ignored him. This icy blue eye stared fixedly at Li Fenglan, and then approached him little by little. At the same moment, Li Fenglan remembered one thing: Cheng Huang is an ancient fierce beast, it can directly smell the breath of human soul. No matter you are reincarnated or resurrected from a dead body, nothing can escape Cheng Huang's nose. This attribute is really terrible. Sure enough, at the next moment, Cheng Huang suddenly lowered its incomparably huge head, and slowly approached where Li Fenglan was. With a plop, the monk next to Li Fenglan, who had just built the foundation, fainted on the spot. But Cheng Huang still didn't even look at that person. It suddenly tilted its head and blinked at Li Fenglan, and then, gently rubbed its nose against the person in front of it. Woo! Is this still the incomparably vicious Cheng Huang in the legend? At this moment, Cheng Huang looked extremely aggrieved, and his ice blue eyes became wet. It couldn't help but wow at Li Fenglan, like a puppy complaining that its master didn't come to play with it for too long. It doesn't think there's anything wrong with showing off its cuteness to humans when it grows up so big. Cough cough. When Li Fuyu came to take advantage of Huang, it was not for the purpose of causing harm to the world. This ancient fierce beast is actually his spiritual pet. Now is not the time to recognize each other. Li Fenglan silently took a step back, trying to pretend that she didn't know Cheng Huang. It has been imprisoned at the foot of the dark Shaoyuan mountain for more than 1,000 years, and it was already full of grievances. Now when the owner wants to act like a baby, he didn't expect him to ignore him. Seeing this, Cheng Huang took another step forward, tilted its head and gave a woo, looking extremely aggrieved, as if wondering why Li Fenglan didn't recognize her. Did he forget himself? In order to wake up Li Fenglan's memory, Cheng Huang suddenly shrunk in size and put away the long horns on his back. Of course this is only for itself, even if it shrinks a large circle, Cheng Huang is still as tall as a floor. Not good. Seeing Cheng Huang suddenly shrunk in front of her eyes, Li Fenglan could already guess what it was going to do next. Before the word stop was stuck in his mouth, before he could say it, he saw the huge beast lying on the cliff suddenly, and then turned its white and furry belly out. Oh, come and touch. Where does this look like an ancient beast? Didn't see, really didn't see. Cheng Huang remembers that thousands of years ago, the owner liked the way he looked smaller. He would gently smooth his hair and rub his stomach. Now it has reluctantly exposed its belly, why doesn't the master do it? Li Fenglan would really like to thank Cheng Huang for not being able to speak. If it could speak, her name would definitely be resounding throughout Tianmian Palace by now. Seeing Chen Zhuang's performance completely different from what was recorded in the ancient books, the only remaining monk on the cliff who was not frightened by Cheng Huang finally couldn't help asking, this beast, does it recognize you? Before Li Fenglan could quibble no, explain. A burst of extremely powerful coercion suddenly hit the cliff where he was. Li Fenglan bent down in an instant, and at the same time, the severed spiritual veins in her body were burning with pain. Ahem! A fishy sweetness welled up in his throat. Seeing this, Cheng Huang rushed over in a hurry, but was stared at by Li Fenglan's warning eyes, and as an ancient beast, it retreated back to its original place. Cowardly Wu! This is the coercion of the Mahayana period. Today there are 2 Mahayana monks in Tianmian Palace. One of them is Li Fenglan's unlucky junior Lin Chaochen. The other one is Zhang Yucheng, the current leader. Sure enough, Li Fenglan turned around and saw that familiar figure. Zhang Yucheng stood in emptiness wearing a green shirt woven from ice silk, his facial features were soft and his eyes were clear. Coupled with the long hair tied into a jade crown, the whole person is really elegant to the extreme. Compared with more than 1,000 years ago, the people in front of them have hardly changed. Li Fenglan remembered that he was talented, hard-working, never favoritism when dealing with sect affairs, and definitely deserved the word gentleman. Zhang Yucheng was originally the most promising candidate for the future head of Tianmian Palace, until Li Fuyu suddenly appeared on the way. It is precisely because of this that the relationship between Li Fuyu and Zhang Yucheng back then was not awkward. All in all, Li Fenglan felt that she and Zhang Yucheng were not familiar even though their names were always mentioned together thousands of years ago. Cough cough, if we have to talk about the past. At that time, he was expelled from the sect by Zhang Yucheng, who had just succeeded as the head. Speaking of, Lin Chaochen was still out slaying demons and eliminating demons. Of course he didn't even have to guess who appeared here today. A black long sword came through the air, it stabbed straight at Jinzhuang's abdomen, leaving no room. This is an unreserved blow from the immortal Venerable of the Mahayana period, and it will not be a problem to flat the mountain and break the sea. But this time, it was blocked by Jinzhuang's thick fur, and the wound didn't open at all. This sword failed to hurt Cheng Huang, but enraged it. The ancient ferocious beast glared at Zhang Yucheng fiercely, then slowly crushed the black long sword that fell to the ground with its sharp claws. Cheng Huang is provoking the other party. Although this black long sword is not Zhang Yucheng's natal spirit sword, it is also closely related to him. While it was being crushed by Cheng Huang, Zhang Yucheng couldn't help covering his chest with his hand, and then spit out a big mouthful of blood. The shattering of the spirit sword also caused great harm to the cultivator himself. At the same time, those monks who tried to seal Cheng Huang again just now also gathered here. Among them was Meng Linzhou. "Don't come here." Zhang Yucheng wiped off the blood from the corner of his mouth and said to the people behind him. To be more precise, he said this to Meng Linzhou. Meng Linzhou's sword-holding hand was cut by a mountain rock stained with yellow aura just now, and the blood didn't stop for a long time. Seeing the distance between Li Fenglan and Cheng Huang, Meng Linzhou subconsciously wanted to approach the cliff and take Li Fenglan away. If Zhang Yucheng hadn't spoken, Meng Linzhou might have already stood on the cliff at this time. "Yes, Master Immortal." The man gritted his teeth and stepped back reluctantly. At this moment, except for Meng Linzhou, everyone up and down the cliff was shocked by Cheng Huang's power. Those who were close to Cheng Huang could feel that this ancient ferocious beast didn't even use its real power just now. It didn't recover its shape, and it didn't even use any spiritual power when it crushed the long sword. Cheng Huang only used brute force to crush the spirit sword of the Mahayana immortal Venerable. Unlike the others who were terrified, Li Fenglan had to admit that seeing Zhang Yucheng's spirit sword being crushed by Cheng Huang made her feel refreshed. But at the same time he couldn't help frowning. Li Fenglan found out that Zhang Yucheng had been seriously injured long before coming here. If it wasn't for this, it would be very difficult for Cheng Huang to crush the opponent's spirit sword at once. But Zhang Yucheng is the head of Tianmian Palace, and he has a Mahayana cultivation base. How many people in this world can hurt him? Li Fenglan hadn't watched the commotion for a few seconds, and the next moment trouble fell on him again. Seeing that he had won against Zhang Yucheng, Cheng Huang quickly turned around and rubbed against Li Fenglan as if asking for credit, almost wagging his tail happily. It moved extremely fast, and before Li Fenglan had time to react, Cheng Huang was already lying on his back beside her again. "Cheng Huang, Wu Master, do you think I am good?" Li Fenglan. "It's hopeless, let's destroy together." Many people here have seen Cheng Huang Xiang Li Fuyu act coquettishly and cutely. This is also one of the evidences that Li Fuyu controlled the ancient fierce beasts and tried to do evil. Li Fenglan silently took 2 steps back, hiding behind several monks, trying to get away with it. Noticing his movement, Cheng Huang, who was lying on the ground waiting to be rubbed, tilted his head, and then rubbed behind the group of monks. "God is going to kill me." Li Fenglan stretched out her hand to caress the strange fairy bone on her chest, and silently thanked the kind person who revived her. "You have worked so hard to resurrect me, but I am afraid that I will not have the chance to repay this cause and effect." Seeing this, Zhang Yucheng's gaze finally left Cheng Huang, and slowly fell on Li Fenglan. Before Li Fenglan could react, Zhang Yucheng's fingertips suddenly condensed a wave of spiritual power towards him. Li Fenglan immediately realized, he wanted to see if Cheng Huang would react when he was in danger. Protecting the Lord is the instinct engraved on the soul of a spiritual pet. Zhang Yucheng may have begun to doubt himself. Sure enough, at the same time that spiritual power hit Li Fenglan, Cheng Huang's icy pupils suddenly stood up. However, a variable that Li Fenglan could not have dreamed of appeared at this moment. A black scabbard flew out from nowhere, it crossed the sky, and finally hit Cheng Huang's forehead straight. With the sound of wow, the ancient divine beast who got up just now staggered twice, and then was knocked unconscious on the spot. This movement was too fast and easy, as if Cheng Huang was not an ancient beast, but a little fox demon who couldn't change form. The vigorous fight just now was like a dream. The surrounding monks looked at each other, and Li Fenglan subconsciously took a half step back. That's not to mention, the scabbard was made of unknown material. The spiritual power that was originally going towards Li Fenglan turned around and melted into the scabbard. In just an instant, everything returned to calm. It took Li Fenglan 3 days and 3 nights to subdue Cheng Huang in his previous life. He never thought that in this life, only a scabbard could stun this fierce beast and swallow Zhang Yucheng's Mahayana spiritual power silently. I have only been dead for 1,000 years, so the world is changing too fast, isn't it? Sect Master Immortal Venerable, what an offense! Just when Li Fenglan was thinking wildly, a voice suddenly came from behind him. This voice seems familiar? Li Fenglan subconsciously turned around. This time, he met a pair of eyes as cold as autumn water. Even Li Fenglan couldn't help being startled when he saw these eyes. He felt that the person in front of him seemed to be able to see through him at a glance. The man has a straight nose, slightly raised lips and a gentle expression. At first glance, he looks like a statue of a carved on a cliff. In short, he is not at all like a person in the world. Feng Lan. Seeing him turn around, the person standing behind smiled and called his name. The man's tone was gentle and lazy. At the same time, the scabbard flew back into his palm. Only then did Li Fenglan notice that the person who came was wearing a black brocade robe covered with golden Taoist symbols that even he could not understand. While retracting the scabbard, the gold pattern on the sleeve also shone slightly. Of course he recognized the person in front of him. Why don't you recognize Master after you haven't seen him for a few years? The man said jokingly. Master, Master! Li Fenglan hurriedly bent down to salute, and said the word a little stiffly. He, Li Fuyu, once swore that he would never call him Shizun again in this life. But things have changed now. Because the man standing in front of my eyes, he is indeed the original owner's master who has been unable to retreat for a long time. Forget it, ask Li Fuyu to abide by the oath that Li Fuyu made, it's none of Li Fenglan's business. Ling Budi smiled and said then patted Li Fenglan's shoulder lightly, as if to comfort him. The next moment the man bypassed Li Fenglan and walked to the edge of the cliff. Sect Leader Immortal, Ling Budi went to say hello to Zhang Yucheng. Just when Li Fenglan thought that Master would plead or explain for her, she suddenly heard him say, Chenjuang's change just now is not a big deal. Oh! Zhang Yucheng was seriously injured just now. He coughed a few times, adjusted his breathing and asked, why did it move? I saw Ling Bai. I nodded lightly, and then said calmly, it's just that my disciple has a bit of Li Fuyu's aura. Li Fenglan? However, with Li Fuyu's aura? Master, are you really here to save me? The disciples of the Law Hall standing in front of Li Fenglan scattered in all directions as if they had seen a ghost. Not far away, all the immortals in the cultivation world also turned very ugly. Why did you say that? Ning Qingmo, who had never spoken until now, suddenly spoke in a dangerous tone. Ling Bian smiled slightly as if he had just realized that everyone had misunderstood something. He shook his head and explained, everyone, don't think too much. The man turned around and walked to the opposite of Li Fenglan, suddenly stopped and stretched out his hand to explore the void. Li Fenglan didn't know what Ling Bai wanted to do, he instinctively backed away. Don't be afraid. Ling Bai said in a low voice. His voice was very gentle, to the point of bewitching. Li Fenglan couldn't help being stunned for a moment. At this moment, Ling Bai's hand has been withdrawn. Only at this time did Li Fenglan see that Ling Bian was actually holding a piece of talisman cut into a human shape in his hand. What is this? He subconsciously frowned. And Ning Qingmo, who was standing in the distance, had already read out the name of the talisman paper, Mingzhen Suan Talisman. Ling Budi threw out the talisman paper in his hand, and the paper instantly transformed into a girl in the air. She was the fairy maid in red who had been following Chengduan all the time. Mingzhenzong people are good at puppet art, and it is very common for them to stick talisman papers and play dirty tricks. The Suan in front of her is the top puppet of Mingzhenzong. But even Li Fenglan herself didn't know when this thing came to him. Could it be that day on the White Jade Lotus platform? It's not impossible to think about it. With Chengduan's cultivation base and small stomach, it is not difficult to paste a talisman paper on his body without anyone noticing. Li Fenglan couldn't help but feel chills down her back when she thought that if Ling Budi hadn't discovered it, she would have been carrying a piece of talisman all the time. As an immortal for a lifetime, he doesn't like the feeling of being at the mercy of others. At this time, Meng Linzhou, the immortal in charge of the Law Hall, also spoke. Li Fenglan swept Ming Zenzong's face on the stage, and Cheng Duan might have tried to post a talisman at that time, intending to wait for an opportunity to wake up the puppet to take revenge. I didn't expect that if you do it, something happened to him. Cheng Duan's spiritual power was stolen from Li Fuyu, so the talisman paper carried his aura, so it's not surprising that Cheng Huang admitted his mistake. Hearing Meng Xianzun's words and looking at the puppet again, the disciples of the Law Hall around him breathed a sigh of relief. Zhang Yucheng paused for a moment, then nodded. Apparently they all thought so. Without the support of spiritual power, the maidservant in the air turned into a wisp of green smoke and disappeared without a trace after a few seconds. Seeing this, Li Fenglan also breathed a sigh of relief, and at the same time secretly recorded this matter in her heart. He vaguely felt that this piece of talisman paper appeared a little strange, but it was obviously not the time to think deeply. To be able to escape this catastrophe safely, Xiaoling must not tire of it. If he hadn't left the customs suddenly, he would have fallen here in all likelihood today. Thinking of this, Li Fenglan couldn't help but glance at Lingbu. To be able to accept the original owner, a former cultivator of Tianligan, as a disciple, Ling Bian is certainly not weak. It was even written in Taoist In Heaven's Sleep that even Lin Chaochen, the protagonist, would ask him for advice when he encountered problems in the later stage. Ling Buzzy is amazing, different from everyone else. To describe him in 4 words, that is Bo Gu Tong Jin. Ling is not tired of being extremely talented. When studying, the 5 elements are combined, and he has a photographic memory. According to legend, he has memorized all the classics accumulated in the Sutra Pavilion of Tianmian Palace for thousands of years. Not only that, but he also knows the ancient runes that have long been lost, read the ancient books and remnants, and according to the records, he went to the great fairy mountains and blessed places, and got countless heavenly treasures. Some monks said that Ling Bai not only knows the past and the present, but even knows the 3 realms. This statement is not an exaggeration. For example, just now Ling Bai directly hit Qinzhuang's life point, causing him to fall into a coma. As for the location of Qinzhuang's life cup ointment, even Li Fenglan had to fight with it for 3 days before finding out. Ling Buzzy appeared near the end of the novel, and he had very few roles, but his popularity was not low at all. But I don't know if it's because the author is in a hurry to finish it, or for some other reason, Ling Bian's offline is really a bit rushed. It is written in the novel, Ling Bian's younger brother Mo Senjai suddenly betrayed the sect, and then these 2 former fellow sects fought for 3 days in a certain forbidden area of the sect, and finally died together. This plot is only a short record of a few hundred words, which is very inconspicuous. It was written into the book mainly because the two broke the barrier of the forbidden area and released a group of ferocious beasts, which caused a lot of trouble for the protagonist Lin Chaochen. The reason why Li Fenglan can remember it is because of the relationship between Ling Baiyi and Mo Senjiu's brothers. When she saw this passage, Li Fenglan just wanted to complain. It was also a fight with her junior brother, and Ling Baiyi's ending was obviously better than being hacked to death by a bad luck junior brother and giving him experience. But now that she has personally seen Ling Baiyan and Mo Senjiu, Li Fenglan feels that the records in the book are definitely omitted and hidden a lot. At least Ling Baiyan is not a person who simply fights his younger brother to the death because of his apostasy. When Li Fenglan was thinking about this matter carefully, Cheng Huang, who had been knocked out by Ling Baiyan's life cup ointment just now, finally started to move. It kicked twice in the air with its white paws, and let out a few pitiful and aggrieved woohoo. Cheng's blue eyes slowly opened, and the disciple of the law hall who had been staring at it screamed. Cheng Huang woke up. Ling Xianjun, what shall we do now? After all, it was an ancient ferocious beast, and Cheng Huang's ability to recover was astonishing. One moment he opened his eyes, and the next moment Cheng Huang stood up. Ling did not tire of attacking too quickly, and Cheng Huang didn't know who knocked him out. But being knocked unconscious while playing Prestige, obviously a beast can't bear it. After standing up, it gave a long moan to the other side of the cliff, red marks appeared in its originally ice-blue eyes, and long horns grew out of its back again. Li Fenglan, who had fought against Cheng Huang before, knew that it was angry. Starting from the long horn on the back, Cheng Huang's whole body was ignited with a blue strange fire. Then, without waiting for people to raise their swords, this beast, which had been imprisoned for thousands of years, finally released its own nature and headed towards Zhang Yuchang's direction. The ancient ferocious beast was born with the cultivation base of a human monk in the Mahayana period. Although Cheng Huang is still underage, his blood is still full of unyielding fighting spirit. There was another long cry, and a huge rock rolled down from the top of the mountain not far away. Seeing this scene, all the monks on the edge of the cliff raised their swords and prepared to fight Zhenjuang's blow together. The suppression of the blood of a natural ferocious beast is much more powerful than the coercion of a monk. Except for Li Fenglan, everyone here is not feeling well. The law hall disciple standing behind even closed his eyes in despair. But just in an instant, the cliff suddenly shone with golden light. I saw the ferocious beast soaring into the sky under everyone's gaze, but in the next second, a giant net woven with runes appeared from the void, engulfing the ferocious beast, making it immobile. Cheng Huang was stunned for a moment, then suddenly stopped struggling, curled up in this huge net, and even made a woo-woo sound from his mouth. It felt that this giant net was full of the breath of the master. At the same time, Li Fenglan couldn't help but sighed lightly, and turned her gaze elsewhere. This is... Zhang Yuchang couldn't help opening his eyes wide, and walked towards the giant net. It's a categorical curse, Ling Budi answered his question. Its owner cast a spell to make Cheng Huang never harm humans. After speaking, the man smiled slightly. But at this time, except for Ling Baiyan himself, no one here can laugh. The three words definite verdict fell into the crowd like a thunderbolt. Never, never harm a human being? But don't people in the cultivation world say that Cheng Huang was collected by Li Fuyu to harm the world? This is even one of the 4 crimes against Li Fuyu. The young disciples in the law hall were all dumbfounded. Suddenly there was a piercing sound in the air. Ning King Mo's breath was disturbed, and one of the strings of the lute in his arms also broke. Ning King Mo's heart has never been as chaotic as it is now after turning to the ruthless Dao for more than 1,000 years. He remembered the past. Everyone in the cultivation world said that after Li Fenglan formed a spirit beast contract with the fierce beast Cheng Huang, there would be no peace in the 3 realms. As soon as the vision of forming a bond appeared, Li Fenglan once again became the target of public criticism in the cultivation world. At that time, Li Fenglan was also seriously injured because of the exhaustion of her vitality in subduing Cheng Huang. Unlike other monks in Tianmian Palace, Li Fenglan did not go out to practice as soon as the foundation was established. He was kept by Master's side all the time, and he didn't leave the sect until Jiying. The first person Li Fuyu met after giving birth was Ning Qingmo. In the years that followed, they traveled the world side by side, overcoming thrilling difficulties one after another. Li Fuyu always thought that Ning Qingmo was her bosom friend. Therefore, Li Fuyu was the first to think of Ning Qingmo when Shizun Fei's Hung herself was punished by the whole cultivation world and fell into a helpless situation. After all, Ning Qingmo once said to herself that she would always stand by his side. On that day, it snowed heavily in the mortal city of Chuan. Ning Qing, who was dressed in a blue brocade robe, sat silently in her residence in the city, drinking tea while listening to the people in the sect telling what happened recently in the cultivation world. During the Wunihur conversation, the three words Li Fuyu were mentioned repeatedly. An ancient fierce beast suddenly appeared, and the comprehension world wanted to join forces to encircle and suppress it. Who knew that Li Fuyu took the lead? Not only did he not kill the beast, he even signed a spiritual contract with that beast. Work together to encircle and suppress. Ning Qingmo suddenly put down the teacup in his hand, and repeated these four words with a smile. Here, the beast is still underage, and the various factions will definitely be able to kill it. The cultivator on the other side felt a little guilty when he said this. After all, before this, only one person in the comprehension world had killed an ancient beast. Ning Qingmo sneered, how could he not know what these people were thinking? These people already knew that they couldn't kill that beast with their own strength. When they heard that Li Fuyu had gone, they hurried back and waited to see Li Fuyu and the fierce beast both suffer. Unexpectedly, Li Fuyu actually defeated the fierce beast, and not only did not kill it, but also signed a spirit beast contract with it. This time, the entire cultivation world was in chaos. An insane Mahayana monk with a previous record and an ancient beast, this is extremely dangerous. Master Xianzun, the person sitting next to Ning Qingmo suddenly stood up and saluted, if you can find the devil, it will be a great thing for the three realms. When you return to the sect, okay, Ning Qingmo suddenly got up and interrupted him, such a big event has happened in the cultivation world, you should go back to the sect quickly. Yes. A group of people looked at each other, and finally got up to leave. When leaving the residence, the leader suddenly approached Ning Qingmo and said in a low voice, Master Xianzun, please think again. The internal struggle of Xianqing sect is fierce, and Ning Qingmo has been marginalized for a long time. Li Fuyu didn't know that her friend was not as indifferent to fame and wealth as he thought. After the people from Suankingmen left, Ning Qingmo warmed the wine while admiring the snow in the small pavilion of his residence. After an unknown amount of time, there was a knock on the door outside the residence. The man slowly put down the wine glass in his hand, held up a paper umbrella and walked towards the door. With a squeak, a white figure appeared outside the door. Ning Qingmo saw that the tip of Li Fuyu's nose was slightly red, and all her long hair was scattered behind her head. The wound on his body has not healed, and there are faint blood stains on the white clothes. Li Fuyu was holding a little white fox in her arms, seeing Ning Qingmo, the docile little guy just now, suddenly bared his teeth at him. Ning Qingmo was stunned for a moment, and then pulled the person outside the door in. He stretched out his hand to stroke the snowflakes off Li Fuyu's shoulders, and asked him with a smile, Little Taoist priest, why did you come to me all of a sudden?